Good evening. My name is Ben Lauder. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Central Region RAC. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, May 16th. It is 6:01 p.m. Our Chairman, Brock McMillan, is absent this evening. We expect he may be joining us online, but since he is not, I will be chairing the meeting this evening. Welcome to the Central Regional Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person at the DWR Central Region in Springville, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This is the public forum allowing you to express your opinions and proposals on the management of wildlife in our state. This RAC considers your ideas, opinions, and proposals and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. We all have our ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife, and we approach this with tremendous emotions and passion. I would encourage all who wish to express their opinion to do so. However, I would ask that we, as individuals, respect opposing views on the issues being discussed. I would appreciate the audience keeping their emotions in check, allowing all individuals to freely express their opinions. Appropriate conduct will provide smooth meeting flow, allowing the RAC to listen, digest, and address all concerns, opinions, and proposals offered for consideration. Rude comments, booing, yelling, hooting, or snickering from the audience while individual comments are being offered will not be tolerated. If inappropriate behavior persists, the offender may be asked to leave the meeting. All right, at this time, I want to welcome all the RAC members to the meeting. And before I do that, actually, I want to recognize those that we have online. A couple Wildlife Board members, Gary Nilsson and Carl Hurst are both Wildlife Board members that are attending online this evening. Let's do a quick round of introductions. We'll start over here with Mike, and after we go around the introductions in the room, then we'll go to our members online for introductions.
Mike Christensen at large.
Eric Reed, BLM.
Ken Strong, Sportsman.
Ben Lauder at large.
AJ Maurer, Agriculture.
All right, let's go to online. We've got a handful of people online. I'll call for your introduction and then go ahead and give an introduction. Josh, let's start with you.
Joshua Leonard, Sportsman's Rep.
Thank you. Jim?
Jim Schuler, non-consumptive.
Thank you. Scott? Scott, if you're attempting to speak, we cannot hear you. We do have Scott Jensen online. Scott, we'll let you work on your issues on that end. Danny?
Yeah, Dan Potts, I'm non-consumptive.
And Braden?
Braden Shepherd, Agriculture.
Thank you. Welcome to the DWR staff. Especially want to welcome those who are going to be presenting tonight. Tonight we've got Heather Talley, Upland Game Coordinator, Avery Cook, Upland Game Project Leader, Jason Jones, Migratory Bird Coordinator, Charles Lyon, Assistant Attorney General, and Jason Robinson, District Wildlife Biologist. Welcome to the public that are attending both in person and watching on YouTube. Those that are attending in person will have the opportunity to provide comments regarding any agenda item. If you wish to make a comment, you must fill out a comment card. Do we have one of those? All right, you can see the gentleman holding them up over here. If you need a comment card, they're right outside the room here on the table. Fill out a comment card and then bring it up just to one of the end tables, and we'll get it around here. That's if you want to make a comment on the presentation this evening. The public that are watching on YouTube will not be able to provide live comments during the meeting. However, the presentations were provided for viewing online, and the public was able to provide comments to the RAC members for this RAC meeting. All right, let's move to our agenda. Agenda item number 1 is an approval of agenda and minutes. I will look for another.
I'll make that.
Okay,
Motion.
motion by Ken,
Second.
second by Eric. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Let's go to online. Josh,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
Scott? Okay, gotcha, Scott. Danny,
Yep, aye.
Braden?
Aye.
All right, passes unanimous. All right, next item on the agenda is a wildlife board meeting update. I was not able to attend the last wildlife board meeting, and I wasn't able to watch it either, but I have heard it sounds like it was quite the eventful meeting. I do have some notes here. Brock was in attendance in representation of our RAC, but I'll give an update here as best I can if there's any questions. Jason, was you there?
I was online.
Okay. Well, and we've got Carl and Gary here if they want to clarify anything from online as well. So let's see. They approved the agenda. They approved the minutes. Getting into the meat of the meeting, there was a motion that passed unanimously. Motion was to approve the permit numbers for general season buck deer permits on the following units: Chalk Creek, East Canyon, Morgan South Rich, Camas, and Ogden. Next, there is a motion to approve the permit numbers for the central regions as presented, with one exception being Oker Stansberry, and they were recommending a cut to 2,000 on Oker Stansberry. That was passed. That vote came to a tie, and then was voted in favor by the chairman to pass. Next, there was a motion to approve 0 permit increases in the southern region, staying with last year's permit numbers, except for Pine Valley, and to increase Pine Valley to 2,300. That passed 5-1. The next motion was to approve permit numbers for the southeastern region as presented. That failed. That motion failed. Following that motion, there was a motion to approve permit numbers for the southeast region, except for LaSalle, and to keep LaSalle at I'm assuming this is last year's numbers at 1,200. That motion passed. Then there was a motion to approve permit numbers for the northeast region as presented, with the exception of the Wasatch Mountains East, and that one being altered to 4,250. That one passed unanimously. Then there was a motion to increase Fillmore Oak Creek limited entry permits by 5 and not the 11 as proposed by the division. So I guess that would be a cut from the recommendation, and that passed unanimously. There was a motion to approve the remaining permit numbers as presented, and that passed unanimously. Moving on to once-in-a-lifetime permit recommendations, there was a motion to accept the once-in-a-lifetime permit recommendations as presented by the division. That passed unanimously. Moving on to bull elk recommendations, there was a motion to ask the division to look into mandatory tooth reporting and to place that on the action log. That passed unanimously. There was a motion to approve permit recommendations as presented by the division, including the additional 250 draw-only youth bull elk permits. That passed unanimously. Moving on to buck pronghorn permit recommendations, there was a motion to accept the buck pronghorn permit recommendations as presented. That passed unanimously. Moving on to antlerless permit recommendations, there was a do we care to review the motions that were withdrawn?
It wouldn't hurt.
Okay. There was a motion to approve as presented by the division, with the exception of the 4 increases and to keep those at 2022 levels. That motion was later withdrawn. Following that, there was a motion to approve the antlerless permit recommendations as presented. That passed 4-2. CWMU antlerless permit recommendations. There was a motion to reduce the number of antlerless permits by 50% across the board for 2023. That motion was later withdrawn. This next motion is rather lengthy. I'm going to just read this verbatim. I move that we ask the division to form a CWMU advisory committee to review the rule and bring recommendations back to the board in June of 2024. The committee should consider if the rule is equitable for both the public and the private parties. It needs to be an incentive-based program to encourage CWMUs to fulfill antlerless harvest. Tools need to be in place to encourage CWMU operators and the division to obtain necessary harvest for unit objectives. The rule needs to address non-contiguous lands and set requirements for trade lands. Land traded needs to be comparable to be fair to both the public and the operator. Trade lands need to be posted with a common sign such that the public can easily recognize it as such. If public tags increase or decrease, then CWMU tags should do the same. This is to be placed on the action log. That was passed unanimously. The next motion was to approve the Summit Point request for 6 cow elk permits, 3 public, 3 private. That passed 5-1. There was a motion to approve the remainder as presented by the division, and that passed unanimously with 2 of the board members recusing themselves. On to CWMU rule amendment. There was a motion to approve CWMU rule amendments as presented. That passed unanimously, again with 2 board members recusing themselves. Big game rule amendments. There was a motion to approve big game rule amendments as presented by the division. That passed unanimously. Big game rule amendments technology. There was a motion to approve peep-mounted single lens clarifiers and verifiers for archery. I understand this was quite the conversation. I don't think it came up until the wildlife board meeting. That passed unanimously. There was a motion to approve the two-way radio band portion of the presentation, and then that motion was amended to apply only to the restricted weapons and hams hunts specifically. That passed 2-4, or sorry, that passed 4-2. And then there was a motion to allow matchlock ignition and friction lock to be included in the restricted muzzleloader definition. That passed unanimously. And finally, the last motion was to approve the remainder of the recommendations as presented, and that passed unanimously. So as I understand it, in regards to the technology committee and those discussions, there was some additions to weapons for the restricted muzzleloader. There were some additions regarding archery equipment and lens clarifiers. The two-way radio ban is only on restricted weapons and hams hunts. And other than that, all the technology things passed. I think I've got that right. And thank you. That was a lengthy one. Any questions on that?
So was this the meeting where the wildlife board said they wanted to pin biology off to the side? Is that, and that was, yeah.
Please clarify that. I'm not familiar with.
Oh, that's just what
that
that was stated, the wildlife board, that they were pinning biology off to the side as they considered the general season deer numbers, so.
All right. Yeah, Mike, I've heard some things about that meeting. I think it was frustrating by many, or frustrating for many. Okay, moving on. Next, we'll have a regional update by Jason.
All right, thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to give an update for our region. Before I get into our update, I just wanted to recognize we have Brinley Jones with us tonight. She'll be taking notes for the RAC for the meeting and compiling them for us. So just glad that she's here and welcome her here. She's awesome. She works at our front desk, and there's probably not anything anybody could ask her that she didn't know the answer to. So she is amazing. So welcome, Brinley. Glad to have you here. We'll go ahead and dive into our update for the section. And, you know, I'm just super proud of our employees in the section. They work really hard. Each of our sections work really hard. It's been a really demanding winter. And now, and wintertime's often a time where we can kind of sit back and catch our breath. And then May hits and they go full bore into the season, summer season, collecting data, a whole bunch of work has to get done in a short period of time. And so they are just running crazy again right now. A couple things I wanted to mention in our aquatic section. Provo River Delta monitoring. I've spoken about the Provo River Delta a few different times and how they've reconnected the Provo River, created a delta and connected into Utah Lake. It's been about, what's it been, about 2 months now, maybe a little over 2 months since they connected the delta to the lake and the water's been running through there. They're doing some monitoring to see what the effects on the fish and the habitat. So far they're seeing the June sucker, white bass, and walleye are starting to move into the delta and spawn. So they quickly keyed into those outflows, into the new outflows coming through the delta. The Creel survey begins today, actually, and it'll be basically an opportunity to ask questions of our anglers, look at angler satisfaction on Jordanelle, and the results of the 2016 management plan efforts. So in 2016, we put a management plan into place. We've been working on implementing many of those strategies into the reservoir, and now we'll see what the effects of those actions that we've taken are and how the anglers are responding to that. I think last time I mentioned that Strawberry had about 40 inches of ice on it. That was about a month ago, I think. So incredible winter up there. It's starting to melt off now. So Soldier Creek is mostly ice-free at this point. Havler, that launching is a little bit difficult due to the snowed-in roads. There's a couple places on Facebook, especially the Strawberry Marina's Facebook page, where you can get some updated information and about access into the bays there. Our aquatics manager also wanted me to mention how great the fishing is right now as well. White bass are spawning at Utah Lake, and lots of different people, hundreds of fish being caught, just crazy fishing at Utah Lake right now, as well as catfish. And you can see the catfish, you know, people out enjoying the catfish catch. Rainbows at Deer Creek and Jordanelle, and then ice is coming off of Strawberry as well. So that'll be some hot fishing there as well. In our wildlife section, every couple of years, our wildlife section across the state holds a section meeting. This year they held it up in the Uinta Basin, and it's an opportunity for all of our wildlife biologists and our coordinators, everybody to come together. And the big thing that they did at this section meeting was review current literature and recent wildlife research. So they took a lot of time to review data and find out what's going on out there through the West and how some of those things can be applied and make decisions within our state and within each of the district biologists' regions. So good time for them to get together and review that research. In our region, we're going to have some fawn and elk calf captures coming up in late May or June and early June. So if there are any RAC members that are interested in getting out and capturing some fawns and calves, please get with me and we can get you out on some of those trips. If you remember last month, I reported that roadkill was really crippling this year for our staff. It was just a huge tsunami that hit us, and fortunately that has slowed down a bit, but our folks are now picking up on depredation issues throughout the region, meaning big game is coming into farmers' fields, alfalfa, whatever they might be growing, and causing some issues there. So our staff go out and they look for mitigation efforts on those crops to try to make it right for those farmers. And then they also wanted me to remind you that only 2 weeks away from draw results being posted. So May 31st is when the draw results will be posted. All right, Mike, go ahead to the next slide. Habitat section. Again, as soon as that snow starts to come off, we have, I'm going to probably say it wrong, but I think about 160,000 acres in this region of wildlife management areas that we're responsible for. As soon as the snow comes off, you can see in that top picture, we start getting runoff. So we're monitoring flood damage on our WMAs. And we're also out spraying weeds. Weeds proliferate quite quickly, and it's always a challenge to stay and get on top of those. They're also catching up with a little bit of a late start this spring and finishing up some restoration projects, working hard on the Stansbury Mountains and out on Diamond Fork Canyon. And then they've also located 4 new guzzler sites on the Stansburys for bighorn sheep and mule deer, and installation for those guzzlers will be planned this June. In our outreach section, if you remember, I mentioned our Salem Pond fishing event for kids with special needs. It was held a week ago today at Salem Pond. We had over 1,300 kids participate, which is just astounding. Each of those kids was able to catch a fish at the pond and take it home. And of course, this doesn't happen. We had many, many partners out there making this happen. So this has been an event that's been going on since probably the early 90s, I think. So, 30 years. But it's very popular. It's a great event, and it's really fun to see those kids out there catching those fish. It's the highlight of some of their days, I think, some of our days for sure. We also had an event called Cops and Bobbers at Vivian Park, and it's also a collaboration, a partnership with the Provo City Police Department and our conservation officers, where they'll go up and catch fish at the pond. Several hundred kids from the local school districts were able to get up and catch some fish with our officers. And then we do have a couple of seasonal positions open right now. If anybody's interested in coming to work for us, we have some aquatic invasive disease seasonal technicians, as well as a dedicated hunter project coordinators. So if anything like that would be interesting, please get with me later. Law enforcement, of course, May 1st, we lifted the seasonal closures on our WMAs and our shed antler gatherings. So a lot of folks were able to get out and start gathering the antlers and getting out on our wildlife management areas to recreate out there. Our officers have shifted their patrols from kind of a mountain patrol at this point, although they still get up there, to fishing patrols and doing some saturation patrols throughout the region. And then we do have a new conservation officer, and I'm super excited to have him come on. His name is Austin Farron, and he is going to be assigned to the South Sanpete District, and excited to get to know him. I live in Manti, and so he's going to be down in my country and probably the best part of the region if I have to pick a spot in the region. And then I want to mention our outgoing RAC members. We have 4 of our members that this is going to be their last meeting. Ben Louder, Danny Potts, Ken Strong, and AJ Maurer. And I just want to give you my thanks. I know how much time and effort it takes to go through and read all the comments and be engaged with those groups that you represent, and then come to this meeting and represent your thoughts and your ideas, and in a respectful and thoughtful way. You've been very dedicated through the years. It's been 8 years that you've served on these terms. You have a passion for wildlife, and it shows as you come to these meetings and you have these conversations, and they've always been very respectful conversations on things that you have a lot of passion about. So AJ, Ben, Ken, and Danny, who's online, just thank you so much. We do have some Clark Bronson prints. I don't have them with me tonight, but there's some nice prints that they've selected that are being made for them, and I'll make sure to get those to them when I get them. But in the meantime, just a big thanks from me and from all of us at the DWR for your time and effort you've put into these RAC meetings. So thank you. Thank you. And with that, I'll go ahead and take any questions if there are any from the RAC. Ken?
When you mentioned about the thing for Salem Pond for the handicapped kids, and you mentioned 1,300 kids, and it was probably more than that, went there fishing, just so everybody knows, they all have the opportunity to catch a fish. And it's not just fishing, they have a chance to reel a fish in. And I just want to emphasize that, because those kids, when they catch one, they are so excited, it's unreal. They want to, some of them want to kiss the fish, some of them want to touch it, some of them don't want anything to do with it. But it's a great opportunity for the kids and for those that are there.
Thanks for that description, Ken. And you know, and you're right. It is really exciting for them. And what you mentioned is what I was trying to explain. Each of you that are going off the RAC, like the RAC isn't the only thing you do to show your passion for wildlife. You're involved in so many other different things that that lends to wildlife and make the agency and wildlife what it is. And I know Ken has been probably to every one of those Salem Pond days. You know, I think each of you have probably served on a committee here and there. I mean, it's just nonstop. Donating your time and your resources to wildlife. And so thank you again, and appreciate your time and efforts. Are there any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Ken.
On Strawberry, of course, I'm sure most are aware that the water was going over the road where the Strawberry River comes out. There's been a boardwalk that was built up there several years ago. And part of it, I think it's the section that Scott Root built that floated down the river a little bit. The rest is tied up and trying to save.
I did hear that. I talked to Alan Ward this afternoon about it to see if our buildings were floating away up there as well. And he said the boardwalk came off the pilings a little bit, and he went and lassoed it, or had one of his folks lasso it, so it didn't go away. But there will definitely be some work to do up there, and I suspect some dedicated hunter hours for some of our folks up there as well. So thanks, Ken. Okay, perfect. Hey, that's all I have, Ben, unless you have anything else.
No, thanks for the kind words, much appreciated. And extend my thanks to the other RAC members that are leaving, or that are going off the RAC as well as the ones that are still going to be here. Yeah. Take care of the region for us. I'm looking at you, Mike, and Brock, and Braden, and everybody else. Anyway, okay, quick update real quick. Amos joined us. Amos, do you want to give us a quick introduction? Just name and what constituency you represent.
Okay, I've been here this past fall. Amos Murphy. I'm with the Confederate Tribes at the Goshen Reservation, and just traveled in to be here in person. It's pretty good out there until you hit that highway, and it slows you down. So
We appreciate you being here. And then Brock has made it as well. Brock, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Sure. Brock McMillan, represent academia. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Brock. All right. Next action item on our agenda, wild turkey plan revision and recommendations. Heather Talley was Upland Game Coordinator, was the presenter in the online presentation. Heather, any points of clarification or anything you want to provide before we get into it?
Always, you know.
All right.
1 second. I just really wanted to go over the air rifles one more time because it sounds like not everybody that has had a chance to look at the presentation, and I wanted to make sure people were aware of the legislative component to this. So are you hearing me okay? Excellent. So the legislation passed the authorization of air guns as a legal weapon type for fall turkey, rabbits, and hares. And according to Utah code, air guns used for these hunts must be a pre-charged pneumatic air rifle that fires a single projectile with a compressed air released from a chamber that is built into the rifle and must be pressurized at a minimum of 2,000 pounds per square inch from an external high compression device or source, such as a hand pump, compressor, or scuba tank. So that part is now in Utah code. And then the division is also recommending through this RAC cycle that the single projectile must be a broadhead tipped bolt or arrow or a pellet or slug that is 25 caliber or larger, weighs 18 grains or more, and is fired at a velocity to produce at least 30 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. So just in case anybody had missed part of that legislative session, I just want to make sure people knew that's where that recommendation has arrived.
Yeah, appreciate that. So if I understand correctly, then the fact that it is a legal weapon for those hunts, like that's out of our hands. But the other part of it is the regulation around the projectile itself and the weapons, and that is within the recommendations that we can make a decision on tonight.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And so, yeah, if there's a different minimum caliber or something, or if you just want to do, you know, something else.
Yeah,
that way.
okay. Thank you for that clarification. Much
Yeah.
appreciated.
You're welcome.
All right, let's go ahead and open this up to questions from the RAC. Ken.
My question is, a year or two ago, we made a big thing on the air guns because there's nothing that comes into the Pittman-Robertson Act. So this legislature has overrode that and said it doesn't matter about the Pittman-Robertson Act. Am I correct?
They have instituted this law without formalizing any kind of PR tax, correct?
So we're eventually going to end up, because of the state legislature, possibility of being able to use air guns for everything eventually and forget the Pittman-Robertson Act. That's why the legislature should stay out of things.
Is that a question? We're not there yet, Ken.
And I believe I think Justin from Utah Air Guns may be here tonight if we have specific air gun questions just for the PR tax application and things like that. So if that does come up.
Okay.
I've got a question. Apologize, I don't remember. Were you the presenter that when we talked about turkeys last time?
Yep.
I believe you were, so great. There was a lot of public discourse concerning that, around that public meeting. And there was a lot of concern with the late season turkey tags, the fall turkey tags. Sure. How do these recommendations play into that? And number one, and then number two is it was requested that the division be more precise with their and surgical with those tags. Did that happen?
Yes, it did. And
Okay.
so how that came about, and I probably should have started with this as well, so excuse me for this, but we did form a committee. I know last time we had this RAC cycle, we spoke about forming a turkey committee formally and going through the process of the revision of the plan, which has occurred. And so through that committee process, we had a lot of great discussions. We had a lot of really good feedback, and the division arrived at our recommendations based on, the data and everything that we've provided throughout that process, and what we feel will accurately attribute to the biology, but also to the needs socially and politically, because we do have, just to address the fall hunts themselves, we realize that not everyone's a fan of the fall hunt. However, we need tools in our toolbox to deal with these depredation and nuisance issues. And we definitely don't want to be growing turkeys on the backs of landowners. So we do want to give them tools to mitigate that situation. However, we are also, again, bringing forward the same recommendation of 2 beardless and 1 either sex permit in the fall, because we do think that we want to be targeting those small targeted populations, as you mentioned, with the more surgical approach. I'll get to that in a minute. And the 1 either sex permit, and a lot of people are wondering, why would we allow any male or tom harvest during the fall? But sometimes those are in fact the offending animals, and we do need to be able to rectify those situations in depredation and nuisance issues. We have outlined in the plan that we want to prioritize trapping over fall hunts. We always want to prioritize that. If you have anything regional specific, Dale Lichty is here that he can speak to, but there's just a lot of instances or situations where if we do have a drier winter and it's hard to get turkeys into a trap with no snow, which is the opposite of what we experienced this year, that it does become difficult. Sometimes turkeys learn not to go into traps if it's a chronic issue. So we just want as many tools as we possibly can to deal with the situation. We also have talked about opening back up some public land for fall hunts, but this is to be very precise and surgical, as you mentioned, with as small of a buffer as possible to attain the goal of actually removing those offending birds, because a lot of times they're roosting at night on private property and then going out during the day on some public lands that are just adjacent to the private property. So we want physical landmarks and easily determinable, boundaries for the hunters, and they know exactly where they are, and they know they're not supposed to be up high on the Forest Service lands or anything like that. So we want to keep that as small of a buffer as possible while still being able to reach that objective of harvesting those nuisance birds. And let me know if I missed any of your question.
No, that was very detailed. I appreciate that. That was great. And then, so my last question would be on those small surgical areas. Will those come back through the RAC and public process so the public can give input on those? Or will that be something that the division institutes outside of the public process?
Such a great question. Thank you. Actually, what happens is our spring data, our spring hunt is going through the end of May, and then we'll get spring data back sometime in July. Then we've got our fall boundaries, or fall season dates are due August 1st. And then we have, August 1st will be the fall permits and boundaries. And then here soon we'll be able to do the fall season dates. But we want to wait until we get that spring information back, and that all feeds also into our permit calculator, which we also took through the process as well with the committee, and we've discussed our permit calculators at length also, and that we do want to have biological input from the biologists in addition to all of the different inputs that we put in to these calculators, which help us to determine what production is, or what we're, male, female survival rates throughout the year, things like that. So we definitely want all of that harvest data back so we can accurately, to the best extent that we can, give the best possible number of permits to be biologically sound. And the hard thing is that between July and August, there's just hardly any time. So we're not able to get that through the public process. And that's why we just get those calculators approved.
Yeah, Heather, I'm not sure whether this falls in under this one or the next one, but you mentioned something about feeding turkeys
Yes.
that was going to be outlawed, or is it?
No, sorry.
I'm just curious because I know a lot of groups feed them.
Okay, here's the deal with feeding turkeys. Number one, do we want individuals out feeding turkeys on their back porch? Absolutely not. Do we want people to teach turkeys to be habituated to being fed consistently? Definitely not. But we did create a feeding policy, and that policy helps direct us when we can feed turkeys and where. We definitely want to be able to address emergency situations. We had some of those situations this winter. We did do some turkey feeding this winter for sure. But we also realize that there's a lot of people in towns that just decide to feed turkeys, and then they're causing problems for all of their neighbors as well. And creating turkeys artificially causes a lot of problems with disease. Of course, then if they're breeding there, then they're going to have poults there as well. So we just want to make sure that those turkeys are on dispersed, so they're not having an artificial congregation for disease issues, and that they're available on public land for hunter use as well. So, but the feeding policy has been already enacted.
Whose hand just went up? All right, Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up on the turkey committee, I might have missed it, but I didn't see in the RAC packet who made up the turkey committee. Do you have a slide or a list of that you can show for us?
I do have that. 1 second, please, and because I knew this was going to come up. So let me just get to that really quick, Josh. Thank you for that. All right, 1 second, and I'll just share my screen with you guys if this works. If not, I can definitely list these out. I would like to say thank you to the Turkey Committee. We had a lot of really long nights and long discussions. So as you can see there, we've got Nikki Fry for research for USU, Chuck Carpenter, who is a research and biologist, Lynn Warwood, which is the NWTF president, Waylon Pritchett from SFW, their Turkey representative, Angie Wanacott served as a Northern Region sportsman rep, Al Iden, who is the West Region Director of Pheasants Forever, Wade Garrett from the Farm Bureau, Scott Daleabout for Southern Region Sportsman, Chris Perkins for Northeast Region Sportsman, Tyler Orgill was a Northern Region landowner, Merlin Esplin as a Southern Region landowner, Carl Hurst from the Wildlife Board, Kent Johnson, Southeast Region Sportsman and RAC, and Sean Kelly from Forest Service, Clint Wyrick from U.S. Fish Wildlife Service, and then Jason Robinson served as our DWR content expert and voting member. So I do feel like this was a really well-rounded list of people. I really thought that we had a lot of really great discussions that came out of this.
Any other questions from online?
Yeah, sorry, thank you for that. Without knowing many of the individuals, I think the organizations they represent look great. It would be helpful to know in the future how that was all put together, but I do have one more question, and it goes back to Ken's question about air guns. Is there any data on the effectiveness of an air gun for killing a turkey? I mean, is there? Yeah, that's the question.
So, right. So because we haven't enacted this yet, we actually don't have data to show that, but we have a lot of other states have regulations for air guns and turkeys. And so the recommendations for the other states are all over the board. So we're doing, what we think is going to be most efficient. What I can say is by using a 25 caliber as the minimum is definitely something that's going to increase lethality to a significant degree. rather than a 22 caliber minimum. And there aren't that many 25 caliber, so a lot of people will end up using a 30 caliber. So we do think that that's going to be efficient as a lethal weapon.
Thank you.
Heather, thanks for that. As you mentioned earlier, we do have Justin here, and I wouldn't do this very often, but Justin is probably the expert on air guns in the state, if not the country. Would it be appropriate to have him address that real quick?
Sure.
Justin, you want to come up to the mic and give us your take on that real quick? Justin, this mic over here. This one over here.
Okay, so I guess the first question was, do we have data proving the effectiveness on turkeys with air guns? There is a lot of data as far as foot-pounds, energy required to humanely harvest turkeys with. That's all. So yes, there's been all kinds of studies and tests, and again, there's other states that have been allowing air guns for turkeys for several years, and they're very, very capable of that. Usually even more capable than, say, rim fires that are being allowed now in that fall season. So yeah, they're very capable of that, especially 25 caliber and above.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was about to ask that. Like compare a 25 caliber bigger air gun to a 22 long rifle, which is currently legal in the fall.
Yeah. So foot-pounds of energy, they're very similar. I mean, obviously depending on speeds, and weights of projectiles, but that one trauma of the 25 caliber versus 22 rimfire, along with the soft projectiles as well, they do significant energy dumps and they're very, very good.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Any other questions? Oh, Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, so, the difference between 17.177s and 22s is immense. So how much difference was there in the effectiveness of, I asked this because I have a 22, right? Caliber, pellet gun. And I was anticipating hunting turkeys with it, but now I guess maybe not. So what was the difference between the 25 and the 22? Is that big of a difference?
Yes, significant difference as far as energy delivered, especially with that bigger bullet face, and also velocity as well. So and projectile weight. So it is significant. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And Danny, to clarify, the 25 caliber rule was specific to air guns. Heather, correct me if I'm wrong. Rimfires, 22 long rifles, still legal in the fall.
Yes. It's just specific to air guns, the 25 caliber. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my question. Air guns, right? We're good.
Okay. Yeah, and just as a point of clarification, when we're talking about air guns, we're not talking about your 177 caliber pellet gun that you grew up with. Today's air guns are much advanced beyond that and very, very capable. So, Ken.
Yeah, I have nothing against air guns. I think they're neat and I think they're very effective.
Ken, is this a comment or a question?
No, a question for him.
Sure.
But now you made my. But what do you feel about the Pittman-Robertson Act being involved with air guns? You can understand that the Pittman-Robertson brings money in and air guns doesn't have that. I just wondering what your opinion was on that.
So the opinion was. There we go. Sorry. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, we addressed the Pittman and Robertson tax and where air guns are involved with that. And there's been organizations with airgun manufacturers that have discussed this, and that was part of it. Do we want to get involved paying Pittman and Robertson tax to be able to hunt, you know? And across the board, the opinion was they're more than happy to pay some kind of conservation relief or something like that. But the demographic of air guns in general, or, you know, with manufacturers, is there is about a 1% of all the air guns built and sold that would actually be used for hunting game animals. So they're saying, well, we don't feel like that would be advantageous for us, where, you know, every Red Ryder, every, you know, pump air gun had to pay a Pittman and Robertson tax. But that being said, we did a lot of internal research on you know, Pittman Robertson funds, how they're distributed, how they're allocated to each state, and the amounts. And what we came up with is basically the amount that would be received in Pittman Robertson tax from air gun sales, especially ones that are used for taking game, was very, very, very little. But one part of that is how it's allocated to the state, two ways. One, by the volume of that state as far as population and hunting. But the next is on license sales. So the more licenses, hunting licenses we can sell in the state, the more Pittman Robertson's federal fund we're allocated to. So we ran kind of numbers and just back and forth of what we thought would, how this would benefit the state or not benefit the state. And what we came up with is we're gonna benefit more by licenses sold. We think we're gonna bring that to the table. As I think we'll sell more hunting licenses because of air guns being allowed. You know, you have that whole demographic of younger hunters, just in general, that don't like noise and recoil, or they've, you know, they just maybe have that stigmatism about firearms in general. We feel like it's going to bring some new hunters to the state. We're going to sell more licenses, and we're going to get a little bit more, you know, allocated to the state from, you know, the Pittman Robertson tax. So we feel like it's more of a benefit by far than any kind of detriment that it would have not paying Pittman Robertson tax.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, let's move to public questions. Questions from the audience. If you have a question, please come up to the microphone over here, state your name and ask your question.
Really quick, I would like to apologize for derailing a bit because my opening comments are actually for the turkey recommendations and not the turkey plan agenda items. So I just wanted to make sure that I was letting you know about that.
No, I think you're fine. This action item is both the plan and the recommendations. So I think we're good.
Great, thanks.
Yep. Thanks for that clarification. Okay, seeing no questions from the public, let's move to online comment summary from Jason.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. So we have a couple of different things. They ask a question about position regarding the wild turkey management plan. We had 3 comments turned in for that, 2 strongly agreed and 1 somewhat disagreed. Some of the thoughts that they shared with us online, there was a thought about having a buffer around the private lands to provide more access to the birds. They thought with that buffer, they'd still be targeting the birds that came onto the private lands, even though they may be off of the private lands for the private lands hunt. And then they would rather see translocating than having a fall harvest I think what they call the fall management harvest. And then also for the turkey recommendations, there were 2 comments, and one strongly agreed and one neither agreed nor disagreed. And the one comment online was either get rid of the limited entry hunt altogether or give out more tags overall. So those were the comments that we had come in online.
Thanks, Jason. All right, we'll move to public comment now. I assume we have some comment cards here. Okay, again, if you want to make a comment on this agenda item, grab yourself one of these yellow cards if you haven't already. They're available on the table out here just outside the doors. Fill it out and get it up to us here. We've got a handful here. Man, this might be, I think this is more comment cards than we had on the big game tag numbers. It's interesting. All right, we're going to start with Cody Reese, and on deck is John Harvey. Cody, go ahead and state your name. Let us know if you are representing an organization or yourself. Organizations will get 5 minutes tonight. Individuals get 3 minutes.
Thanks, guys. My name's Cody Reese. I am here on behalf of Youth Hunters Voice. We've gone through Heather's, and thank you for doing all of that. She puts an incredible amount of work into this. The division's recommendations. On behalf of the youth, we have a little more of an ask from you guys as a RAC tonight. So what we're looking at is right now the limited entry permits are kind of earmarked 15% to the youth. We have more youth that put in for these than 15%, even though the licensed hunters in the state of Utah under 17 and under only represent 11% of the actual license holders. We realize that these numbers are constant and consistent, but the youth in the state of Utah are applying for these tags in greater than 11% odds. And so it does exceed the 15%. What we'd like to ask you guys to do is make this unlimited for youth. Let's give the youth an opportunity to go out and hunt in the prime seasons when they would have the best opportunity and success and experiences that they could possibly have. Again, I want to remind you, only 11% of the license holders in the state are youth. So we're not asking for 1 million tags for youth. There's 1,699 permits issued. If we stuck with 15%, it's closer to about 254 tags. Last year, there was about 500 tags issued to youth because the numbers are larger and the youth were getting their hands on more of these, but it's something that they're not looking at the tall mountain of bonus points to do, and we're happy that they're doing it. We appreciate all the info that we've got from the division. They've been helpful for us to determine what we would provide to you as a recommendation. We do feel like that it's important. I've talked to Heather on the telephone and in person, and she has gave me a little more information than what I was aware of. There's actually some studies that have been done that to gain youth long-term retention, they need some consistency and they need more days in the field. 1 day of fishing day or 1 day of pheasant hunting day isn't quite enough to get them there. So I'd really like to have you guys consider strongly to be able to get these kids some permits every year so they have some consistency. They can plan on, I'm going hunting. I think that having something else to challenge you with is maybe a mentor program or something you can get the youth involved with doing some extra things on the extra unlimited youth tags. I mean, the unlimited later tags and the fall tags. I mean, let's get some youth involved if we can. I appreciate your help. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, John Harvey. On deck is Connor Sheriff, I think.
How you guys doing? My name is John Harvey, and I am an air gunner, and I represent the air gunners of Utah. SB 205 originally is my bill. I put the bill forth because we have trouble for many years getting air guns legal in the state of Utah. Problem with the 205 in 2021 is that Pittman and Roberts. We actually said to Wildlife, or when we did the bill, I said, listen, let's put a stamp, $25. We were happy with that. Legislation says no, because you're discriminating against air gunners. So they waived it. It went through the system. The Wildlife Board says you need PNR tax. So it killed us for that particular year. So we came back last year. I did a new bill, HB 469. And then legislation says, you know what? We're going to go 2 years and see how this worked out. And then we'll revisit this again in 2025 to see if we can sustain this without adding PNR. I'm a big fan of PNR. I was also a fan of the stamp we presented to the legislation. They shot it down. It wasn't because we protested. We protested when they said they weren't going to charge us. That's when we had an issue with the air gun bill in 2022. My next issue is allowing us to hunt big game with air guns. I've talked to many people higher up at Fish and Game at DNR. Lethality is not an issue. They don't have a problem with lethality. It's that we have to go to these RAC meetings and present this to the community before they'll take the next step. And that's what I'm doing today. I hunt air guns in other states. We kill big bore animals. I've killed a 320-pound pig, blew his brains out, and didn't take a step. Lethality with air guns is not an issue. It just depends on who's a little bit skeptical at the time when we're trying to do such as this. Utah air guns sell the more air guns than anybody on the planet. But yet we couldn't hunt in our own state. So I have to go to Texas and hunt. Texas get all my money. I have to go to Arizona hunt. Arizona gets all my money. North Carolina gets all my money, and Idaho gets all my money. I spend approximately about $6,000 to kill a free pig. But that's what we have to do to hunt with air rifles. So that's when I got involved. Jason and Justin's a friend of mine, and I said, hey, I know legislation. I live up Capitol Hill. I'll see what I can do. I said it's unfair to taxpayers that we can't hunt in our own state, but we sell the most air guns, but other states are getting all our revenue. Now, if we can bring back the PNR stamp for big game, we have no problem with it. Just charge us a stamp. We offer $25. Some legislators told me that's too much. But every time you sell a ticket, every time you sell a tag, you make an additional $25 that the state would not have. And I tell you this, from all the studies, PNR doesn't pay the amount of money we're talking about paying with our stamps. PNR is really like 0.004% is what you get from the federal government. So I just say, think about hunting in our own state and all the revenue that we will be losing from guys like me going and Justin and likewise going other places and taking our money away from our own state that we live in, the state that we sell the most air guns in the planet in. So I say, my thoughts are, can we have that conversation at some point in time where we could bring big boar or big game to the table and let us hunt in our own state and grow revenue for state conservation in itself and not other states such as Texas and Arizona and Idaho and North Carolina and states alike. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Coroner Sheriff is up. On deck is Jordan Mattinson.
So my name's Connor Sheriff, and the issue I have for the recommendations for turkeys is the 2 unbearded tags in the fall. I I just don't see that being reasonable. With how this winter was, a lot of winter kill for these turkeys. And then you go and kill two hens in the fall and we get another bad winter. What happens? We don't got turkeys for the spring. So that's just my consideration. I just don't think it's very smart if we do that. And then with relocation, I'd rather relocate turkeys in the fall than kill them. I think that's just a better idea. Then we have more turkeys for the limited entry tag in the spring and just more opportunities. So that's what I got to say. So thank you.
Thank you. Jordan Mattinson is up, followed by Trevor Palmer.
Tonight, I wanted to focus more on like the feeding aspect of things and then see if we can put more of an emphasis on relocation in the fall, wintertime. Instead of implementing those 3 tags, see if we can see what our number is going to be, see what the hatch is coming into this fall, and then revise that and see if we can keep it at 1 in the fall. I'm not asking to completely take it away, maybe keep it at that 1, and then more on the feeding aspect. I know the money's out there. I'm not talking like these associate SFW, NWTF, and see if we can all get on board to feed some of these like tighter populations of birds so they're not going on to farmers' property. And we can keep those populations that we worked so hard, maybe out on the Vernon, some of these isolated locations, and keep those birds alive. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor Palmer, followed by Angie Wanacott.
Hello. So I love hunting turkeys. Super fun. I always take my boy with me.
State your name, please.
Trevor Palmer. He's 6 years old and we have a riot and we hunt a lot of birds in the spring. It was a harder year. You could notably, it was, and there was just less birds out there this year. It seems like it's taken longer for them to breed this year and to come into their cycles. I would just like to also oppose the additional birds in the fall. Let's keep it at 1. And if we need to kill more birds, I feel like the spring season is killing the same birds we're killing in the fall. I drew a limited entry tag. It was a long winter. Where the turkeys normally are, where we hunt them every year, there was still snow. They didn't seem to act like turkeys that you hunt in the spring. They seemed a lot more like you were hunting winter birds. If I drew that tag, that limited entry tag, and then I had an opportunity to buy a general season tag and extend my hunt, something like that. If we could maybe potentially kill more birds in the spring, I think it would have an effect on the birds that were there in the fall. Just my thought. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Angie Wanacott, and this is my last comment card. If anybody else wants to comment, please get one of these and fill it out.
I'm Angie Wanacott. I'm representing SFW. I was actually one of the people on the turkey committee, and I'm here to tell you that we actually support the recommendation. So thanks.
Thank you. All right, I've got a couple more comment cards coming in. Chuck Carpenter, followed by Cameron Brinkerhoff.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Chuck Carpenter. I'm actually the district biologist for National Wild Turkey Federation. I was also on the committee with Angie, wherever she went. And I want to say, yeah, we support the recommendations. I think there's valid concerns here. One of the things with fall birds going from 3 to 1 back to 3 that was brought up in the committee was landowners that do have nuisance birds. The division needs a tool to get rid of those birds sometimes. Trapping isn't an option, manpower. And a lot of those landowners, they don't want to allow 30 people on. They'd rather allow 10 people on with 3 tags in their pockets. So with the reduction of area to reduce, and we saw a reduction in tags last year as well. So we don't have the tag numbers that we did do no matter what. It's not going up again. So now you're just giving 3 tags to less people instead of 1 tag to more people. So it's really just reducing the amount of people that these landowners might have to allow onto their property. You know, a lot of them don't trust a lot of people, just how it is. So that's kind of why I went back up. And the two beardless and the 1 tom, we saw a lot of like targeting of toms in the fall. And so then, you know, we wanted to push it. So there is this beardless component. That is what it is. The hunt, it wasn't supposed to be a hunt. It was supposed to be a management tool. So to manage, you have to shoot the hens and not toms, obviously. And we hope with the reduction of boundaries, it'll be more targeted to these nuisance birds. And it won't be so much of a hunt. But yeah, so that's all. We just want to say we support the recommendations, and also we support the air gun recommendations. I think 25 and above caliber definitely weeds out maybe some of the lesser experienced people, and it puts it into a range of high lethality. And you're not just getting Joe Blow that goes in and gets a 17 from Sportsman or whatever. You have like a dedicated air gunner that I think will have, you know, better success with. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Cameron Brinkerhoff.
Hi, my name's Cameron. I currently work for Justin Jacobson. We run an air rifle accessory company together, separate from Utah Air Guns. But prior to that, I have been in the industry for 11 years. I worked for both Air Force Air Guns, who's a manufacturer of the world's most powerful production air rifles. We're talking 50 caliber and up. And prior to that, I worked for another retail outlet. So because of that, and because it's the bulk of my career, I've had the opportunity to hunt all over the world with air rifles. So 2 things I want to address. First being the lethality question. As we go into this more, obviously this is opening a door. Air rifles are not, when we talk about air rifles, obviously we're not talking about the break barrel pump up pellet guns that we had when we were kids. We're talking about 50 caliber, 405 grain slugs producing 720 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. I have successfully hunted whitetail, alligator, black bear, and American bison, all with air rifles, all one-shot kills, all clean, ethical harvests. I have no doubt in my mind that they are lethal. I've done it. I've seen it done. The type of stuff we're recommending for 25 caliber and above, we're talking 100 plus foot-pounds typically, maybe just under that. So we're on par with rimfire for those of a standard like rimfire, not talking like super fast stinger, stuff like that. You're about 100 foot-pounds in there somewhere. So very similar when you compare the 2 on paper. So I think where we're headed with turkeys, I don't have any concern about that. The second part of my comment is about PR tax. In 2021, Southwick Associates did a study on where the PR money is coming from. And they found that 25.8% of the money, $1.1 billion, only 25.8% of that is collected from firearms and ammunition used for hunting. The rest of it comes from target shooters, sport shooters, people buying ammunition to protect their homes, these type of things. They are selling, and we are buying far more firearms than we're selling for hunting. When that money gets put into the PR fund, a certain portion of it is earmarked for certain programs that's set dollar amounts, administration fees, hunter education, state, multi-state conservation, these types of things. That's already earmarked. And whatever's left over, it's about 80% of the money is allocated back to the states based on 2 factors. Justin already talked about this. It's based on the state's land mass versus the total national land mass. And then it's based on hunting license sales versus paid hunting license sales versus the national average of total paid hunting license sales. So we can't add land mass to the state of Utah, like unless we try to annex part of Wyoming. So we can't get more money that way, but we can get more of that money that we are already paying into the PR fund back by selling more hunting licenses. And to me, that's why air guns are important, because It is a way to get more people into hunting. I've seen it happen time and time again. People who are adverse to firearms, to hunting experience in general, who weren't really ready to step into that world, who have been able to pick up an air gun and go and do it for the first time, and it converts them into an outdoorsman. It teaches them to be a sportsman. Who in here didn't learn how to shoot with a pellet gun? It's that same, even though it's not the same type of gun, we're talking about a much more powerful gun. It's the same experience for them, and it allows them to go out and to do and become one of us. So for me, yes, there might be some PR tax lost. Again, though, that's also paid by the manufacturers and the importers. So most of that money is going out of state anyway. There's not really a whole lot of air rifle manufacturers in the state of Utah. In fact, there's none. So it's a way for us to get money that's already being paid by Utah citizens back into our state by hopefully selling more licenses. We talked about the stamp that we brought forward. That was something we really had hoped would go through. In the future, I'd hope to see maybe an option where if people are applying and plan to hunt with an air gun, they could do an additional donation when they are paying for their permits when they're putting in for the draw. I know that one thing we've even talked about is if somebody could, if someone's a customer of Utah Air Guns or Air Marksman, our companies, and they show that they've donated because they plan to hunt with an air gun, we've talked even about reimbursing that towards them or helping them, using that as a discount towards the sales. So.
25 seconds left.
Okay, well, that's all I have, but I appreciate your time and I'm grateful to have been here. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I don't have any more public comment cards. Let's move on to RAC discussion. I'll open it up for discussion, and when appropriate, we'll have a motion. Looks like Josh has his hand up. Let's start there.
Thanks, Ben. I had one more question for Heather, and I wasn't fast enough on the trigger the last go around. So Heather, when you presented last year, I asked you to show us a slide of spring hunter success rates for like a 10 to 15 year period. Do you have that by chance?
Sure do. 1 second, and let me get that pulled up for you. All right, now I just have to share. Okay, so when you had asked in 2020 about this, it was for both fall and spring harvest. So you kind of wanted to look at all of it. We can look at the success rates as well on different graphs, but this is just how many over-the-counter turkeys are harvested versus how many limited entry turkeys are harvested. So Northeast region, they don't have a fall hunt, so we just have the spring data for that. Just let me know when you're ready for me to go to the next region. Or if you just want to see Central, that's fine as well.
No, yeah, I mean, statewide would be great, and then you could break it down by region.
I mean, I can show you statewide on a different graph for sure, but this is where I've got the regional graphs. So it's just up to you what you want to see first.
Can you maybe talk us through this graph? It's a little hard on my screen.
Sure. So this is just Central Region spring harvest. Again, over the counter is in orange and limited entry is in blue. So that's just showing our total harvest over the past from 2010 to 2022 in the spring.
Okay. And what year was the first year where we did 3 birds in the fall?
2018. So the fall hunt was instituted in 2014. Then 2018 is when we first did 3 permits in the fall. And here's a fall harvest graph. I can pull up statewide and get
I'm more interested in the spring harvest. So spring
since
harvest
2014 or since 2015.
So 2014 it was first implemented, and then 2018 it was. I'm just trying to understand it because it's like you said, it's kind of hard to see.
Sure. Let me just pull up a statewide graph instead. 1 second.
Josh, I think what you're looking for, you're trying to determine if that 3 bird harvest opportunity had an impact on spring harvest. Sounds to me like that's what you're looking for.
Right. And it's
absolutely,
sorry,
yeah.
I just interrupted you.
Oh,
Sorry.
you're good. Looking at the graph, it looks to me like it did not have any impact on spring harvest. That's what I see.
Agreed. It's actually gone up since 2018.
specifically to the central region, obviously, because that's the graph we're looking at.
Right, let me get.
What about
It is an
statewide?
interesting-
Yep, doing that right now. One sec. All right, so we've got fall turkey success, hunters afield, percent success, all that stuff. Here's the fall turkey hunt with total permits sold and total harvest. Whoops, sorry.
Do we have the spring harvest statewide?
Yeah, we do.
think that's what
So
he's
here's
looking for.
limited entry versus the over-the-counter. Hang on one second. So there's total permits, hunters afield, total harvest, and then limited entry is, of course, going to be a higher success rate. That's in red. And then over-the-counter is in orange.
That's
So,
that's statewide for spring.
Yes, for both spring hunts, yes.
so personally, I don't see, I mean, there is a downtrend there around 21. I mean, that could be completely unrelated to the fall three-bird harvest. Mike, you've got a comment?
Or
Yeah,
it could be completely related before Mike goes.
My guess is it's completely related to the 2 severe years of drought because it actually went up for a year after the three-bird harvest.
Yeah, so we kind of started into that drought in some areas in the southern region, even in 2018, continued 2019, then had that late spring snowstorm in 2019, which didn't help some of our upland game species. And so 2020, still drought, 2021, then we had a really harsh winter. We are realizing that this is an issue. And that's why some of our success has gone down because we were simply issuing less permits. The over-the-counter harvest, of course, is unlimited. But of course, we're anticipated that success to go down due to drought. And now, possibly with these really harsh winter conditions, luckily turkeys do put on mass really easily once green up does happen. And we are hoping to have really great brood rearing conditions this year with a lot of forbs and insects due to the water. So we're hoping to see some good poult production this year.
Yeah. In a prior slide, I was going to ask the reason why a lot of that harvest went down for the fall. It correlated exactly with the reduction of fall permits, correct?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
So that to me says that you're trying to be proactive with your approach.
Definitely. So that's, and that's what we've done. We had already started to scale back in our approach with our permits and our boundaries prior to last year's RAC cycle, of course, because we had noticed the drought. We know that there's going to be impacts that way. Then the board did ask us to decrease the number of fall permits last year. So we did have a reduction in permits last year, but if you look at, they didn't say anything about our fall boundaries last year, but if you look at our fall boundaries on the hunt planner, you can see how scaled back they were and how we're trying to mitigate any of those issues relating to, turkeys carrying over the spring and trying to definitely be proactive in our approach to how we're managing in the fall and always prioritizing translocations, as we mentioned,
So Heather, I think getting to the root of the question here or the concern is when we increased to allow a three-bird harvest in the fall, did that have any impact on the following spring harvest?
And it's hard to say because we don't have those direct correlations. We don't have that exact data. And it coincided with so many other weather conditions and other things. But I can honestly say that I don't think that the 3 birds per person or 3 permits per person necessarily did that, especially because as we saw in previous RAC meetings, and I can bring this up as well if you would like, Josh, but I can bring up the male versus female ratio of birds that we're harvesting in the fall, which is why we're also asking for the 2 beardless and 1 either sex permit, because we are just harvesting mostly males, or the majority is males.
Yeah, I would agree with you too. As I look at the data, I don't see a direct correlation of that increase in fall harvest to to any impact on the spring.
Well, and we account for all of that in our permit calculator. So
Yeah.
if we are taking more in the fall, we're already accounting for that in the spring permits. What we're taking in the spring, we're accounting for in the fall permits. So we're definitely
Okay.
cognizant of that.
Mike, you look like you've got another comment.
Well, I was just going to say that I like that we've gone from all toms, because a lot of people were shooting toms, and I think it actually did affect it in places I hunt. But I think going to the hens and being more surgical makes a lot of sense to me. So I like that the division went from something that was kind of unpalatable to a lot of turkey hunters now to more of a understandable situation. And the only thing that I would say is I would just hope that the division keeps being more surgical with those hunts. And I really like that they're, focusing more on transplanting, and I think it's really important to state those objectives. And so I'm pretty good with the plan as they've got it. So
Thanks, Mike. Brock's got his hand up. Brock, let's go to you.
Yeah, I agree with what Mike just said. I'm still not a fan of air rifles, but the state legislator told us, so I think everything presented is good.
Thanks, Brock.
I did have one clarifying question for the youth group, and if it could just be a short, brief answer. In the email that was sent out, you're asking for like either sex permits in the spring and year-long hunting and those kind of things. Is that still on the table for you, or is that taken off the table with your comments tonight?
It's a real big ask. I mean, I understand that it was a big ask, and so I think that, the comments tonight probably sum up what we really would hope for could happen at a minimum. I mean, we'd like all of it, but I understand it doesn't work biologically all the time. So.
Okay.
Ken, you got a comment?
Well, not necessarily a comment, but I definitely like the idea of unlimited youth tags for the spring hunt. And I would like to make a proposal.
A motion?
A motion.
Okay, but before you do so, I just want to, I should have addressed this, but when we first started RAC discussion, but real quick. So we've got a couple things on the table. First of all, this agenda item is both the turkey plan and the turkey recommendations. So we can, if we want to split those up, we can. And then a couple items that I picked out of comments was the youth hunt structure. There was a comment or two about air rifles for big game. I don't know that I want to spend much time on that here because that's not this meeting. And then also the number of tags in the fall. So if we want to break things up, that's what I see as appropriate. With that, if you've got a motion, Ken, go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept a proposal that all youth can draw a tag for the early hunt on the turkeys. And
Yeah,
with that proposal-
I'll second that, Ken. This is Potts.
And to go along with that, if they don't get their turkey on the limited entry, they can continue on and hunt the regular early hunt.
Can I make a clarification? I'm so sorry.
Pardon?
Is that appropriate? May I make a clarification?
Please.
For this proposal? So some of the numbers that were presented were from a couple years ago with 11 and 12%. And then our numbers that we have from just last year was 16% a lot of times, or 14%, 15 and 18%, 21% of youth were applying for limited entry turkey. And then percentage of youth who did draw out for limited entry turkey permits was 21, 20, 18, 21, 21, 25, 33. So those are pretty high percentage rates for turkeys. We currently do allow youth to, we just have the 15% as a minimum requirement that any allocation of permits has to allow 15% to go to youth. So that's not a cap, it's just a minimum. And so more youth that apply definitely have a chance of being drawn out, as you just heard. And right now, as it stands, 15% of those permits do go to youth at least. Then they do have the full limited entry season. If they don't harvest, they have the 3-day youth hunt. If they still don't harvest, they have the entire month of May. So the reason we're not asking for any other recommendations or supporting anything different from our current recommendations is simply because we feel like we are giving the youth that opportunity. And due to our 3 studies, we're cognizant that the older generation, like, you know, college students and older that have kids, those are the people that we need to target to become new hunters, because then they will get their kids hunting, as was previously stated. Just those one-time youth events or just offering youth more permits may not necessarily recruit or retain those youth. And the other issue is just offering anything over the counter, 3 permits over the counter. You're already reducing that barrier of a draw system. So we don't know for sure what that would look like in terms of numbers of youth that may take advantage of that.
Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it, Heather. Okay, so we have a motion on the table by Ken to allow unlimited youth permits during the limited entry season and to allow those to carry over into the general season. There was a second by Danny prior to the complete motion. Danny, do you still support a second on that motion?
Yes, I do. I don't see any reason to limit. I thought that was very well explained by our youth representative.
All right, so we have a motion. We have a second. Let's go ahead and discuss the motion. I see a hand up. It looks like Mike has a comment. I have a comment. Brock, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Heather, did the committee discuss this when they came up with the plan?
No, this was not part of the committee discussions. We had not yet received this recommendation at the time.
Is this recommendation consistent with the plan?
No, I'm sorry, Brock, I misunderstood your question. No, it is not.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of this motion myself.
Thanks, Brock. Mike?
So I would just like to know, if we open the early hunt up to youth, what's the actual number of youth that apply for the early hunt? I mean, how many hunters are we adding into the field possibly?
So it looks like the entirety of the state last year was 1,803 that did apply. And we don't know the full number that may just take advantage that have not applied.
Yeah, and if this was implemented, how would it be implemented on a regional basis? Because aren't we giving our limited entry turkey tags on a regional basis?
Good point, and thanks for bringing that up, because I had forgotten to mention that so the limited entry hunts are just the regional hunt boundaries, and then which have been tweaked a little bit in this year's recommendation just to follow physical highways and roads rather than county lines. But so it would go into a system of, every time that we've got a turkey hunt, essentially, in each of those regions would assume unlimited youth. And we don't know what that would necessarily look like. But right now, as it stands, if they do draw out limited entry for one specific unit, which would be the regional boundary or the new proposed boundary, they get the entire statewide hunt for the 3-day youth hunt and the general season. So that also is an additional opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, we got a hand up online, also a hand up in here. I'm going to give a comment. We'll go to Scott and then to Ken. I'm not a fan of this motion at all. I'm absolutely opposed to it. And the reason being, as Heather's already mentioned, the youth have ample opportunity to hunt turkeys already. They get 15% of the limited entry tags. They have a 3-day youth only season. They have the entire general season, which is over the counter, as is the 3-day youth season. There's the fall season. I don't see this as a lack of opportunity issue for youth, in my personal opinion. So I'm absolutely opposed to this motion for that reason, and also concerned about the impact that it would have on that limited entry hunt for those hunters that draw that tag in that season. I mean, it's basically taking our limited entry hunt and turning it into a half general season hunt. I'm not a fan of that. Scott, let's go to you next. Scott, we cannot hear you. Looks like you are, is he muted? It looks like he's muted when you had your mouse over him. It looks like the microphone's crossed out right there. Scott, we still cannot hear you. All right, we'll go to Ken.
Heather, that amount you gave of hunters, was that just the youth or was that all hunters?
That was just the youth for this past spring. Or excuse me, that was the total youth applications was 1,803. And then total youth that drew out, excuse me, was 344. And then the total applications altogether was 11,665. So we did have a total average throughout the entire state, 20% who drew were youth.
I would just add, I mean, we've had this discussion around general deer as well and in the past, and it's just not something that's feasible. I mean, if we open up essentially the giving every youth a tag, people that are of adult age will never hunt again. I mean, it's just, I'm not anti-youth, but there is ample youth opportunity for turkeys already. And I don't see this as an issue. All right, whose hand did we get? Is that Braden? Braden, go ahead.
As a dad with 6 kids, I should be 100% behind this proposal that Ken just brought up, but I'm not. And I agree with you, man. I think the opportunity I have to buy my kids over-the-counter tags and go in May and also hunt a little early in April is plenty of opportunity. And so I also don't support the motion.
Thanks, Braden. Any other comments?
Could I add one more thing? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Ken was going to talk. Okay. Just that we do have a lot of other opportunity with upland game species in general that don't require permits, such as pheasants, chukars, quail, and forest grouse. And we could definitely look into more, there's definitely some mentorship opportunities for those species that don't require a permit.
Ken, did you have a?
Can I call the question?
Go.
I call the question.
I'm sorry. I thought you asked if you could ask a question. Yep. All right, let's call for a vote. All in favor? I have one here. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to call all in favor and all opposed here in the room, and then I'll go to each individually online. So one here in the room, all opposed. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 in favor, 4 opposed here in the room. All right, going to our online, Josh.
No.
Jim.
No.
Scott. So Scott is in favor? Is opposed. Scott is opposed. Danny.
Yeah, I seconded the motion, and I still want to support that youth group. That seems like that they're the ones that complained. And when I heard the number of kids that didn't get to draw out relative to the ones who did, then that kind of sealed the deal for me. So I'm with Ken.
So a yes from Danny. Braden.
No.
And Brock.
No.
All right. I didn't tally those. Did you tally those?
No. But there were 2 opposed and a lot, or sorry, 2 for and a lot.
I think there was just 2 in favor. So 2 in favor. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 opposed. So motion fails. 2 in favor, 9 opposed. All right, with that, I would entertain another motion.
Ben, I'll move that we accept the DWR's recommendations on both the plan and the rule changes as presented.
Okay, motion by Braden to accept as presented, both the plan and the recommendations. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Eric. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, let's take a vote. Is there a better way to do that than what I just did?
I think you just have to go through them.
Okay, all right, we'll do the same. All in favor here in the room? 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor. All opposed? 1 opposed. All right, online, Josh,
Opposed.
Jim,
Favor.
Scott, is there a chat that he can type in? Scott, if you can type your oppose or approval or opposed into the chat, or send a text to Jason. Danny,
Yeah, I'm in favor.
Braden,
Yes.
and Brock.
Yes.
Okay, I've got 8 in favor, 2 opposed. That's without a vote from Scott. Okay, the 2 opposed, Ken and and Josh. Do you guys want to give any explanation as to your opposition? Ken, go ahead.
Well, one thing we didn't talk at all about the fall turkey hunt, and I think that we should have talked about that before we just closed it all out.
I called for discussion. Nobody brought it up.
You're too fast for me. I'm too old.
Josh?
Yeah, I'm not convinced by 5 years of data. Brock suggests that it might be drought, but the fact is that spring success rate is on a downward trend, and you're allowing a very limited amount of people to kill 3 birds. When you're talking about youth and you want to get youth out, they're going to do it in the spring for the most part, and killing those birds. And we know they're on the public in the spring, and they're in the private in the fall. So I've been opposed to this 3-bird limit, and until I see an upward trajectory, which it's not right now from the charts that we were shown, I'm opposed to it for that reason.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to our next agenda item, Upland game recommendations, again presented by Heather. Heather, any clarifications that you would like to provide to us or updates?
Just the same air rifle recommendations for rabbits and hares.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the RAC? Ken?
Is there any plans to do predator control to help pheasants out?
So we've got a few things going on with pheasants. And just for those who have not heard me talk about this before, I just figured I'd hit it again. Reason for pheasant decline compared to some of the more eastern states include farming practices have changed, where we used to have ditch rows and now we have pivots, which no longer provides those riparian habitats. Use of pesticides kills off insects, which chicks need to survive, so there's not good brood rearing habitat. We only have 10% of the wheat production that we used to have in Utah. We only have 10 to 12 inches usually of precipitation on an average year, where eastern states may receive about 40 inches. And of course, urban sprawl and development, housing and developments decrease available habitat. We did cover some predator information in the turkey plan as well as the upland game plan last year. So there is definitely something that can be done with predation programs for specifically small targeted areas. But usually the reason that predation is an issue for upland game species is because of habitat degradation. So upland species have evolved with predation and generally adapted, which is why they have really high reproductive rates. And but lacking habitat and sufficient vegetative cover can really be a detriment. So predator bounty programs are often suggested as a way to improve upland game populations, but a lot of times they have been shown to be ineffective and costly and having little to no influence on predator population, again, unless it's a very small, targeted, high intense situation. So an example, I believe, is South Dakota, that they've done some predator control and had not yet seen any improvements from that. So Expanding, manipulating, or otherwise managing habitats will generally be the most efficient practice for managing and influencing predators on upland game populations. And just, trying really hard to get those WRI projects in, wanting to make sure that we're keeping up with our WMAs for predator projects. And please keep in mind that many mesopredators that people have issues with that they want this bounty for, such as red fox, raccoon, and striped skunks, can already be taken year-round without a license. So there's already a lot of data that we have on predator control programs. We do realize the need for taking those animals. And again, I think a lot of that can go back to some mentorship with youth and things like that our youth group spoke to. And we can work towards something like that to try to get more trappers available, definitely. But that's, we do discuss predation in both the upland and the turkey plan.
Thank you. Whose hand just went up? All right, Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, so when you say hares, that's plural. Are we only talking game animals like, snowshoe hares? Because the other two hares are white and black-tailed jackrabbits, and I don't think those are game animals per se. So hares, is that just an oops on the plurality or what?
Of course it is. And Danny, you're going to hear a lot more of mistakes that I have made that other people are going to correct tonight. So I apologize. Snowshoe hare is the only thing I meant, and cottontail rabbit, as those are the game in the Upland Game Guidebook. Thank you.
Just as an avid, white and black-tailed jackrabbit hunter and eater for my entire life, I don't want things to get in the way. We're good.
Nothing's in the way.
I think we can find some room for some forgiveness there.
Thank you, Ben.
All right, I saw another hand go up. Who's? Oh, okay. All right, any other questions from the RAC? All right, seeing none, let's move to questions from the audience. Any questions from the audience? All right, seeing none. Jason, do you want to give us a report of the online comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the question, which describes your position regarding the upland game recommendations for 2023 through 2025, we had 2 comments sent to us online. One strongly agreed, and then one was neutral or neither agreed nor disagreed. Only one comment, a written comment sent to us, and it was asking the DWR to advocate for more crane hunting opportunities in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we will definitely have Jason Jones can speak to more crane permits, but that is a flyway process. So.
All right, moving on to public comment. Looks like, do we have one comment card? Is that? All right, I have one comment card from Cody Rees. Please state your name and provide your comment.
Cody Reese, I represent Youth Hunters Voice. This is a smaller ask, but we're going to ask it. On the sharp-tailed grouse permits, we would like to see this not be limited to 15% for youth. We consider a lot more than that, but we were seeking for unlimited sharp-tailed grouse permits. So I'm going to just kind of give you a real life scenario here on a youth and what that looks like to them. Again, and I could be corrected on some updated numbers, but approximately 11-12% of our state is youth license holders. I spent a lot of time in the field hunting upland game. For a 17 and younger person to be able to identify a sharp-tailed grouse versus a hen pheasant is very challenging. A, they're harder to hunt, C, and hit. B, and I don't feel like this is a very big ask, but it would put an opportunity in their pocket. And or if they did accidentally shoot one, it wouldn't be a penalty to them, as the challenges are already mounting for the youth in the state of Utah to make it more scary. So our ask would be unlimited sharp-tailed grouse permits. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. All right, I don't have any other public comment cards. Let's move to RAC discussion. Mike?
How many sharp-tailed grouse permits does the state offer a year?
And again, that's with the use of a permit calculator. So hang on one second, let me get to that information. So it does change year to year. Last year, we had a total applications of 696. 66 of those were youth, and 40 of those youth actually drew, and we had 288 total draw. So we just had 36 permits in one unit and 252 in the other. Sharptail are, just as we talked about with, I know you already know, but sharptail are on the decline. As we talked about with pheasants, they're kind of facing all the same issues. And we just, even in, I think from last year, our total estimated population in our most robust population was about 1,500 birds. So
Yeah,
we're just not sitting.
I just couldn't support putting any more pressure on such a fragile species, so I couldn't support that youth option. So.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Mike. Ken, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just go back again on the pheasants and the predators. For your information, I go back to Nebraska all the time to hunt. I had just had a shatter in Nebraska. I hunt the last 2 days of a 90-day hunt. Last time I was there was 25 of us, and we killed 75 roosters in 2.5 hours. The reason, the guy that owns the property kills every varmint there is that he can find. And so the pheasants don't have a problem getting preyed upon. And I think Utah needs to look at that. Nebraska's looking at it, trying to figure out how this one section of the state has so many birds. So it's something we need to look at, and that's the predators.
They can definitely be a contributing factor. I don't think anybody is denying that, definitely. But we recognize the greater issue of habitat, and I'm sure the habitat you were hunting on is very different from what you're seeing in Utah. Okay.
Braden, go ahead.
I'll just mention that I know the landowner that Kent's talking about, it is a great property with lots of pheasants, but it does have great habitat as well. And you've got 5,000 to 10,000 plus contiguous acres in the area that are just premier CRP areas. And so I'd love to solve the pheasant problem. I go to Nebraska as well every year to hunt pheasants and whitetail. I wish we had more pheasants in Utah, but I think the plan as written does a good job of giving opportunity.
Thanks, Braden.
That we had a comment come in. Why can't we have sandhill crane hunt in Utah County? I know you said that the flyway specifies how many crane can be taken, but why can't we have a hunt in Utah County?
A lot of the focus is in areas where I know that there's larger concentrations of cranes and depredation issues. If Jason wants to come speak to that, he definitely can. Great.
Hi, I'm Jason Jones. So we work within the federal framework for sandhill cranes, and they're concerned about a subspecies of crane that could occur in Utah County. So right now, they're not going to allow us to have a hunt in Utah County. We can offer hunts in Cache, Box Elder, Rich, and Uinta counties. And for the time being, that's kind of what we have to work within.
Sounds like the air guns, it's out of our hands. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Seeing no other discussion, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we accept as presented.
I'll second that.
Motion by Mike, second by AJ. Any discussion on the motion? Do we want to wait for Ken to return? Okay. All right. All in favor? Unanimous here in the room. All opposed? None. Okay. Ken, we are voting on, there is a motion to accept as presented.
I vote yes.
Okay, we're still unanimous in the room. Let's go to our online people, starting with Josh.
Yes.
Jim,
Yes, in favor.
Scott?
He says yes.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Danny?
Aye.
Braden?
Yes.
Brock?
Yes.
Passes unanimous.
If Scott logs out and logs back on, that might clear it up. It did for me one time.
Scott, maybe take Mike's recommendation and give that a shot. All right, moving on to the next agenda item, waterfowl rule and swan hunt recommendations. Again, presented by Heather. Unless I saw, okay, so not Heather, I see, okay, and not Blair.
His mic's not on.
Okay, can you guys hear me? So, like I said, I've been the coordinator for 2 days, but they did pluck me out of the marshes of the Great Salt Lake where I've worked in waterfowl for 18 years. So, nice to
Okay,
meet everybody.
thank you. Any clarifications or updates you want to provide to us before we get started?
Yeah, so I think everybody had a chance to watch the video that Heather did. Obviously, our recommendation is about like maximizing opportunity and keeping the swan hunt open. Some clarification, there was a mistake in the video that we need to clarify where we talked about having 100,000 trumpeter swans in Utah. And so biologists are seeing 3,000 to 4,000 trumpeter swans. And on average, our tundra swan population is around 50,000, and that peaks sometime in mid-November. And it hasn't changed for years. It's around 50,000, and then the trumpeters have just increased over time, but the 100,000 was a mistake. So we're seeing 2,000 to 3,000 trumpeter swans.
Thank you, appreciate that. All right, let's start with RAC questions. I'll lead out on this. I have a question regarding the trumpeter swans. So the increase in harvest that we have seen over the last few years, do we suspect that that is related to an increase in the populations, or is that due to hunters actively targeting them?
Well, I think it's both. The population has increased, and I mean, some of this we have to guess how much we're looking at. I mean, some of it's a mistake. People don't know they harvested a trumpeter swan, but obviously from looking at social media, others are taking trumpeter swans as a trophy. And it's easier to take them as a trophy because the population has increased.
Okay, and educate me here a little bit. So trumpeter swans, we have a limit that we can take in the state that's determined by the federal government. Is that?
So
do I understand that correctly?
to give a little history, there was a lawsuit back in the early 2000s where the Trumpeter Swan Society basically sued the state, and there was an environmental impact statement that came out of that. And the state agreed to do several things, like have a swan orientation course, do weekly reporting for swans. We instituted a quota, which was 10 back then. And recently Blair was able to move that quota with data he brought to the flyway from 10 to 20. So those quotas come from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the division has a flyway representative that goes and works with the flyway, and that's the migratory bird coordinator. And so typically when you go to the flyway, you try to represent Utah and do the best you can for the state of Utah, but you do end up working within the framework of the federal government.
Okay, thank you. Follow up to that. With the current recommendation, making it illegal to harvest a trumpeter swan, I understand this will allow the season to continue through its intended end date. Is that accurate?
Well, the idea is we really need a short-term solution that keeps the season open so people have the opportunity to fill their tag. And so that's the whole reason behind that, just to keep the season open.
And then
to discourage people from harvesting a trumpeter swan.
Yeah, and when that incident occurs where there's an incidental harvest, an accidental harvest, if you will, what is the repercussions or penalties for that hunter? under the current recommendations?
Under the current recommendations,
The recommendations that
okay,
we're
so
discussing
it's going to
here.
be illegal. The recommendation is to make it illegal
Right,
and to seize the swan. And currently, the federal government allows us incidental take of 20 swans. But this recommendation is to make the take of a trumpeter swan illegal. And what we'll do is issue a permit for a tundra swan. And we won't be allowing the incidental take. It will be illegal to
right.
harvest a trumpeter
I understand
swans.
that. My question is because that's going to happen. I anticipate that somebody is going to accidentally take the wrong species. When that does, I see law enforcement raising their hand. Maybe this is a law enforcement question.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to get at is there a citation issued? I know you've mentioned that the swan would be seized, but I'm curious about additional to that, citation, so forth.
So this is going to be like any other species that we have during the waterfowl hunt, where we have certain limits on each bird. That we'll look at it on a case-by-case basis to see what's going on. The bird will be seized. It will be a violation. It is a Class B misdemeanor violation is what it is. And we'll look at it on a case-by-case, whether it's a citation or a warning.
Okay,
Can I
thank
ask
you.
a question while he's there?
Yep, please.
Is it possible to seize the swan without delivering a citation? If
So the actual take of the swan is illegal.
Yes,
So
but
they violated the law.
your proposal, but I'm not asking about your proposal. I'm just saying, is it possible that you could seize the swan but not issue a citation? Is that a possibility under current code? That if
So-
we pass something here that didn't make it a Class B misdemeanor, that didn't criminalize it in, or whatever term you want to use, because I'm not a law enforcement guy.
So
But they couldn't keep the swan. So they had incidental take, or they targeted, they got the swan, they have to check it in. Is there a way that you can confiscate it without giving them
So
a
are
ticket?
you concerned about a monetary fine or something like that?
I'm concerned. So I've had lawyers reached out to me that said that if they had a Class B misdemeanor on their record, that would be an issue for them in their profession. There's, people are concerned about which officer comes and what,
Okay,
what
so
kind of.
Are we concerned about a warning violation is also on that? Because we have the potential that most of those could go as a warning, documenting it in our database that an animal was harvested illegally.
Yeah.
Mike, just to clarify
Yeah.
for me, maybe, are you saying if under the current rule, if somebody comes in with a trumpeter swan, can law enforcement seize that swan
Yeah, would it be possible to have them seize that swan rather than?
under current rule?
Mike, are
Okay,
you asking for current rule or under the recommendation?
Well, if we had it under current rule and they seize a swan, that would take out the incentive for people to target those swans. And if it's mandatory that they have to check them in, they have to bring that. And if they don't check it in, that becomes a criminal violation or whatever ticket.
Correct.
But if there was a way that swan could be confiscated or seized without giving them some kind of a ticket penalty that could be, a misdemeanor and things like that.
So that goes through the court process?
Well, it wouldn't be the court because is there a way? It's not illegal.
Okay, so
here's what I want to get.
Let me see if I'm understanding. Under current rule, it is not illegal to harvest a trumpeter swan.
Yes.
Under the proposed rule, the trumpeter swan then becomes illegal.
Okay, so how do we not make it illegal, but it's not legal for them to possess? So
that you would have to ask probably
our attorney
to deal with that, because what we're proposing is that the trumpeter harvest becomes illegal.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking is it's if somebody harvested a trumpeter and they checked it in, they couldn't keep that bird. So they couldn't have that bird and have it taxidermied and displayed. They would.
I understand the question, but that would have to be a question that.
Mike, your concern is an accidental take and essentially criminalizing that person. I share that concern.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that really any different than somebody harvesting 2 pintail or 3 hen mallards or a scop after the season closes? Because that's what this closely resembles, is that scop season that closes at the end of.
Yeah, but I think a scop on the wing, like I've hunted a lot of birds, a scop on the wing is more easily identified than, say, an immature trumpeter or a tundra swan that's mature that might not have the yellow. I don't remember what it's called, but the bill measures as a trumpeter. Does that?
That's exactly what I agree with too.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So as far as seizing the bird without making it illegal.
Without a
Yeah,
penalty,
to,
yeah.
To the question, I think it is different because it's a more difficult identification than the other examples were given. Blair, you look like you got something to say.
Yeah, so we talked about this quite a bit. One of the challenges we had was really parsing out the difference between take and possession. And I believe if it comes down to code, they're kind of the same. So it's hard to separate those two from saying you took something, but you can't possess it, or vice versa. And so the act of taking is also possessing. And so we had to take away both rather than just one, if that makes sense. And a lot of that comes down to higher legal language than we were able to even make a change to.
That's our definition of take is to harvest, pursue, chase, harass. So all of that, the possession and the harvesting are all under that definition of take.
Okay. Mike, you've raised a great question, and I do think it might warrant some comment from our attorney, if that's a possibility.
Charles is back here.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, usually our attorneys are online, so I just assumed, but
Yeah.
fantastic,
Just happened
thank
to be
you.
here this time. So I don't know, I mean, the best way that I can explain this without doing a deep dive into it and trying to understand how it's gonna fit together is using that prosecutorial discretion, right? So it's on a case-by-case basis. I think you can hand in a trumpeter's want and not prosecute somebody or charge somebody with a Class B misdemeanor after doing an investigation and understanding what all those circumstances are. I understand that that's definitely going to be a concern for a lot of people based on their professions, because I happen to be of the same profession where if you get that type of a charge, that it can be problematic for you. But I guess the best thing I can say is, based on a case-by-case investigation, if somebody's doing that incidentally and that's taken into account, that person should not have anything to be afraid of. If you go into investigation, it is something that they see that this should be charged with, that's the individual that made that choice to do that.
I just have a hard time leaving that in the hands at somebody else's discretion.
I completely agree with you, but we're entering comment territory here. Let's save that for the discussion. Great question. Thanks for bringing it up, Mike. Hold
Man,
on a
could you
second.
leave
Ken.
Charles-
We've
could
had,
you have Charles stay up there,
yeah,
man?
Braden has a hand up. He's still there, and then to Ken. Go ahead, Braden.
Mr. Lyons, good to see you. Glad you're here today. My question is, couldn't the division do something akin of an administrative penalty where you take this animal, the only penalty is a seizure of the animal, and you lose your license? You know, I really struggle that we're getting into the criminal realm here, when the division could do an administrative, just take the license and take the bird. And I just struggle that we're going to criminalize behavior and leave it to a prosecutor and to a county to decide whether the person's a criminal or not.
I mean, I agree. That's definitely a possibility and something that you all can take into consideration and see if that's what is a better route. But I guess based off, I wasn't a part of all the conversations of how the division got to the point where they're at. And for some reason, that's the way that it is in this recommendation. But I think these are good questions, and it's definitely something within your purview to discuss and maybe make a recommendation to the Wildlife Board.
Thank you. Ken.
My question is, I'm not a waterfowl hunter, and the reason I'm not is because I can't tell the difference on the birds. But if I draw a swan tag and I go out and I shoot the wrong swan because it's all by itself flying over me. I don't know how it is for you, but I sat down and looked at pictures. I don't know the difference. I can't tell the difference, especially if that bird's 60 feet in the air.
So I do like to hunt waterfowl, and I'm definitely, sympathetic to your concern. But I think if you were hunting swans and you wanted to make sure you were doing it right, you have to make sure you're listening for the vocalizations, and maybe you don't take the shot. And that's something we do a lot in waterfowl hunting, because waterfowl hunting is a pretty complicated sport, actually, because we already have a lot of species restrictions. Like redheads and canvasbacks look the same, but they have had different restrictions on the limit, or scaup and ringneck ducks look really similar, right? So I think it's totally doable. An ethical hunter can go out and harvest a tundra swan and not take a trumpeter, but I think people have to be a lot more economical with what they decide to take a shot at, because when I got taught to hunt waterfowl, and that was actually when I took, I'm assistant manager job with the division in 2005. I mean, they always taught me don't take the shot if I don't know what the bird is. And actually that became part of the fun of waterfowl hunting, because then we identified the species we wanted to take. So, but I am sympathetic to the fact that it's a more difficult ask, for sure.
So along those lines, how can somebody, so when swans are checked in, do you ever check in swans that might have been a tundra but measured as a trumpeter, or vice versa?
So I just read a research paper on this, and 99% of trumpeter swans have a bill measurement over 62 millimeters, and 99% of tundras have a bill measurement below 60 millimeters.
And how many swans do we plan on harvesting?
Do we plan on harvesting?
Yeah, like if you ran this season and you give out 2,000 tags, you're going to harvest what, 1,000 swans?
Last season we gave out 2,700 tags, and we harvested around 885 swans.
So 1%, so that's still 10 either way. So that's where you get possibly 20 of those 18 of those 900 could go either way. So even though it's 1%, when you put it on a scale like that, I mean, that could inconvenience or cause a problem for 20 hunters.
I think when folks are measuring swans, they're gonna, if they have any question, they're gonna check with me. I mean, because a tundra swan has an obvious yellow eye lure and a trumpeter swan doesn't. And I think if there's any question, people are gonna be reaching out to me. And we are also like looking at revamping our, we're doing a training video for measuring. I've got to get that done as one of the things I do in the next few months. So I don't think we're going to have quality control issues on the measuring part, if I'm getting to your question. So.
All right, Brock, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to follow up on what he just said. So I think he said 99% of one species are over 66 millimeters and 99% of the other under 60. So on the wing, 99% have a bill over 3 inches and 99% of the other have a bill under 2 3/4. There's a 1/4 inch difference that you see at 30 meters on the wing.
So I think when people are hunting swans, they are listening for the vocalization and looking for the fact that a trumpeter is so much larger. And that's a lot easier to tell if you're seeing both species in there at the same time and you're listening for the vocalizations. So.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, let's go to, Carl, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I usually don't interact in this, but I've got a question. What I'm being told is that the majority of the trumpeter swans are being harvested north of Forest Road. I believe Forester or Forest Road. Is that correct, with the public shooting grounds being the area that's the problem?
That's correct.
So would the division be, instead of doing it would the division be able to enforce a split quota? One north of Forest and one south of Forest?
I think we could look into doing a split quota if that's what the RAC wanted to do. I'm not sure that's the boundary. If I was thinking about it, I would choose. We'd have to look into what would make sense if we split the areas up. I'm not sure that would be the right split, but there is a chance we could manage it with a split season like we do geese. So,
Thank you.
Thanks for the
Sorry,
question, Carl.
sorry, Ben, I don't usually say anything in this.
No, we appreciate the question. All right, let's go to questions from the public. Any questions from the public? All right, seeing none, Jason, do you want to give us a summary of the online comments?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chair. We had 8 comments come in online. A majority of the comments, 75% or 6 of the comments strongly disagreed with the proposal. 1 somewhat agreed with the proposal and 1 strongly agreed with the proposal. The weighted average for this was 1.88, or just slightly in between somewhat disagree and strongly disagree. The comments that I would like to share that came online, several of them. 1 was, would like to see the results of the study in the flyaway make the current penalty worse. For example, a 10-year ban rather than making it a criminal act. And they were also concerned about people just leaving the Swan if they shot a trumpeter in the field and not bringing it in to be measured. There's also comments, they support the change, and although they are frustrated with the early closure and something that you talked about, is there a better method to identify than the bill measurement? Several comments go to Carl's question of closing public shooting grounds to reduce the trumpeter swan harvest. 1 comment is that the current penalty is fair, so leave it as it is. Another comment, would like to look at other options before making criminals of people over an honest mistake. And the final was, would like to see an increase in the number of trumpeters that can be taken, and that's been addressed by Jason as well, so.
Thanks, Jason. All right, we'll move to public comment now. Looks like we've got a few public comment cards here, 3. All right, we'll start with Cody Reese, and then on deck is Rob Spafford.
Cody Reese again, here in support of the Youth Hunter Voice. We looked at the proposals. We're not in favor of the proposals. We sent in some comments. The trumpeter swan rule changes. If we had to just say yes or no, we would say, please don't push this through. This is something scary for youth. Looking at it through the youth size is like it's been mentioned here, it's hard to differentiate. And the biggest fear we had was the penalty. So you guys have kind of hit both of our things, looking at it through the eyes of the youth and their concerns. If there is a way that you could do something different, we would urge that. It's not, this is just the way it's proposed is we're not in favor of. I would be in favor of maybe a split season, maybe a close the trumpeter with no penalty. The incidental take will still happen. We are allowed that. It's not a problem. So I don't know why that would be just a step in the right direction for a year or 2 to see what happened. But we do understand that the trumpeter swans may be targeted, or probably are, by sportsmen, and what we've heard, like possibly even nationally, just because we're one of the few states that have it. But we don't support shooting the trumpeter swans. We just know it happens incidentally, and from the youth's perspective, it's something that's scary for them, something that would deter them from hunting. So thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Rob Spafford. On deck, Peter Myers.
My name is Robert Spafford, and I spent about 80 days in the field in Box Elder County. I hunt the Chesapeake Duck Club. And about 5 years ago is when you guys opened that up for swans. For those of you that say you can't identify the difference, I adamantly disagree. If you're shooting at these birds at 35 yards or less, which is where you should, then you can tell. And reality is, if you're not sure, you don't shoot it, period. That's the way I was taught to hunt. That's the way I taught my kids how to hunt. And that's what I'm teaching my grandson how to hunt. It's not, and I can tell you, I spent a lot of time in Corinne, and even people in our club, people are targeting the trumpeter swans. They want a trophy bird, and that's what they're doing. Because a trumpeter, as opposed to a tundra, they'll spend a lot of time in the field. A tundra swan almost will never land in the field. So people are shooting them in the fields. People are shooting them at the public shooting grounds. And it's not fair for other hunters, because it takes usually 3 or 4 years to get your swan tag, to get an email when you're out there saying, oh, by the way, this ends today. Because typically we don't get a lot of tundras on the Chesapeake Club until around mid-November. But I strongly agree with the proposal. I don't worry about the misdemeanor, because I know if I shoot 3 canvasbacks, I'm going to get a ticket. And guess what? I deserve it. If I shoot 2 pennies, I'm going to get a ticket. Guess what? I deserve it. You shouldn't be in the field hunting if you can't identify the animal you're shooting. If somebody shoots an elk because they think it's a deer or vice versa, he ought to get a he ought to get a ticket. But I get really, really wound up about this when people say, oh, I can't identify that bird. That is just absolutely ridiculous. I got a 7-year-old grandson that can identify birds in the air. And that's just kind of the way that it works. So the orientation, yeah, okay, that's pretty simple to go. You can't flunk, and I tell people, they go, well, you can't really see that yellow patch. If you get that bird in effective shotgun range, which is 35 yards, you can see the yellow patch. And if you're not sure, wait for it to open its mouth, because there's a huge difference between the sound a trumpeter makes between a tundra, or they're also called a whistling swan. I have no problem with the fine. I mean, a misdemeanor on somebody's record is like a parking ticket. It's like a speeding ticket. So, make it hurt a little bit. And I can tell you the restrictions that we put in, that you don't get the tag for 5 years, accomplishes 0. Because all these people want to do is shoot a trumpeter. It doesn't make any sense to me. The hunt got shut down originally north of the Bear River Highway Road for the simple fact that they got sued.
I apologize, I didn't give you a warning, but that's your time. I'll give you another 20 seconds to wrap up.
Okay. Anyway, the reason why that got shut down was because the Friends of the Earth sued and said, we're going to shut down the whole season. And that gives them an opportunity to do it again. So once again, I think that the proposal you guys have made is good, and I vote for that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Peter Myers, followed by Angie Wanacott.
Yes, my name is Peter Myers. I've been a waterfowl hunter in the state of Utah for 52 years. Out of that 52 years, I've taken possibly 6 tundra swans. I hunt on private property in Box Elder County, and I can tell you one thing. If you spend any amount of time at all in the field, and as Mr. Spafford has stated, when those birds are in range, there is no defying which one's which. And I applaud Mrs. Talley for taking the time to put this together, this proposal together, because it needs to hurt. We have hunters, not sportsmen, hunters that are afield, that are unethical, that are thinking of nothing more than themselves. Last fall, I had a friend of mine from Overton, Nevada, draw a tag. I called him, says, the swans are in, come on up. He got 4 hours before they shut the tag down. 4 hours. It took him longer to drive here than it did to hunt the swans. He went home empty-handed. This rule needs to come into play to put this to bed. I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Angie Wanacott, followed by Ross McClintock.
Hi, I'm Angie Wanacott. I'm representing SFW, and we just wanted to come and let you all know that we support the division's recommendation.
Thank you. Ross McClintock.
Good evening, Ross McClintock, Safari Club, Utah. The only thing I have is former law enforcement. I really don't like when I hear like, oh, it's up to judgment at the time and the place and that stuff. I just think it needs to be real clear. I kind of think that, and I certainly understand that it's always the hunter's responsibility to know what the game is. That goes without. I was a hunter education instructor in California for 30 years, and that's one of the basic things that you teach is it's always your responsibility to know what your game is or your target is and what's behind it. We all teach that. But I like what Mr. Christensen said, and I kind of wonder if something about like if you have a warning, or you cite them with a warning, and then if it happens again, then maybe you take it another step further. But again, it's always the hunter's responsibility to know what the game is. But I just think I just don't like kind of a nebulous, it's a case by case. I just don't think that's right. That's all.
Thank you. All right, that's all the public comments cards that I have. We'll move this to RAC discussion. So as a reminder, we've got on this agenda item, waterfowl rule and swan hunt recommendations. All of our comments here tonight seem to be related to the swan hunt recommendations. I'll go ahead and give a comment briefly on this. I agree with some of the sentiment that I believe that there are people that are targeting trumpeter swans, and I think we need to deal with that. I don't like this approach, primarily because I don't like the idea that we're going to criminalize somebody for misidentifying two birds that, while some of our avid hunters in the audience here are adamant they can tell them apart, I don't know that every swan hunter can. There's the comment about a deer versus an elk. That's a much different scenario. I mean, anyway, and also I don't like it being up to the whims of an officer. The very same officer may have a different opinion from day to day. If he got a bad night's sleep and is in a bad mood, he may just write you a ticket versus the day prior, give you a warning. I don't like that at all. So I'm not sure the best way to approach this. I don't like it as presented. Mike.
I liked what Braden said. He said it more succinctly and was a better delivery than I can do. So I just think that if there's an administrative rule, as he mentioned, that could allow that they lose the swan, they lose their permit because it should be tagged. Like when you bring I haven't had a swan tag, but isn't it an actual permit that you cut and date? So to transport that, it needs to be cut and dated, and if it's the wrong species, they lose the swan, they lose their permit, they don't get another one. That's a pretty substantial penalty to cause people to take their time and to really educate themselves the best they can, but still protect against the criminality of it. So if it was possible to do something like that, that's what I would like to see.
Thanks, Mike. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Ben, you and Mike made great points. If you're going to allow a swan hunt, it's a rare enough hunt, a rare enough species to where showing 3 millimeters on the beak at 30 yards, apologies to the gentleman who stood up and said, you can tell the difference, but it's a pretty rare special hunt. And if you're going to allow it, I think you have to allow for unintended take. And so to criminalize it, and some people say a misdemeanor, no big deal. Every point is a point against you when it comes to law enforcement. And so leaving it up to a CO on the day,
I can't get behind it. And if there was a way to take the trumpeter, I don't want to see any trumpeters killed. If there's a way to take the trumpeter without giving the ticket, let's do it in the rule and not this one doesn't seem to have the teeth that it wants to, and I want it to have teeth, but not in this way, not with a citation. So I don't like it.
Question on the current rule. What is the penalty for take of a trumpeter?
On the current rule, you're allowed to take a trumpeter currently.
Right, but doesn't that then incur a waiting period?
Oh, yeah, they put a 5-year waiting period, but I
That's
mean,
5 years,
we
okay.
kind of had discussion that this last year with the waiting period was the earliest the season had ever closed.
All right, thanks. Scott, go ahead. Scott, we are still unsuccessful in hearing you.
Hey, Scott, you might have to go in and enable your microphone to be used by that app. That happened to me one meeting.
Hold on, I think I can see oh, maybe that's just anybody talking.
So yeah, on your phone, you may have to go in and give permission for is it Google Meet or whatever it is, whatever app that is,
yeah,
to
we're
be able
using
to use
Google
your
Meets.
microphone.
I mean, worst case scenario, Scott, just call into somebody on the rack and hold it to a mic, right?
Scott, if you want to call Jason, you're more than welcome to.
I also think that I think it'd be beneficial to go back to the prior boundary, because most of our take is on PSG, on public shooting grounds, and in the Corinne private duck club areas. That's what the data shows where most of that take is. That's what the data shows in the sheet that the division gave us. So if we go back to that previous, that previous boundary, I think that would help solve some of those issues too.
Thanks, Mike. All right, I think we got Scott on the phone.
No issues. Okay, Scott, can you hear us?
Yeah, is my voice coming through? Is my voice coming through there?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, it sounds like there's a real issue with targeting swans. That's my kind of concern. I want to get a feel for how much of the problem is really that versus incidental take. Is there data from law enforcement to help us understand that?
So the question is, do we have data, and I would extend this law enforcement or biologists. Yeah, can we distinguish, or do we have data, or can we distinguish between incidental take versus targeting? Do we have a feel of
At this time, I
that?
don't have any feel for that data.
Okay.
Of what has been incidental take versus the targeted harvest.
Okay, so Scott, that was a no, we don't have that data.
And Scott,
Alright,
what we'll
other-
do is if you mute your, next time you're doing that, just mute your own computer and we won't get that double feedback loop.
Thanks, Braden. Ken, did you have something? No, you looked like you had something.
Yeah, that's the reason I don't duck hunt, because I know I'll make a mistake and they'll nail me to the cross. So.
Braden, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to go with, I just really feel like criminalizing this is not the right thing yet. Maybe it is in 2 or 3 more years. Maybe if we keep seeing the trend of this problem, but I would really appreciate going back to the prior boundaries and just have a split season, as Carl mentioned, and it should alleviate the problem, right? We still have the ability to take 20, I was going to say trumpeters. I'm here on Google. I'm also a duck hunter, but not a swan hunter. So I'm like trying to Google the difference here, and I'm like watching videos to see if I can identify them properly. I'm like 50-50 so far. in the air. So I must not be a very good, and I'm a biologist undergrad and a lawyer now. So it's probably the lawyer that messed me up identifying birds. But I just don't like the idea of this gray area. I think you either need a bright line, either it is a misdemeanor, it's not, or it's just a fine. Honestly, I think we just should go back to what the division was doing a couple of years ago and stick with this kind of a split season and go from there.
And the one thing I would add to that, that I think was tossed around by Mike earlier is writing in rule that we confiscate a trumpeter without violation. I mean, that we're not currently doing that. That's an additional step we could take. Did you have some?
Yeah, we've been talking quite a bit about what if we went back to the original boundary. And I just want to clarify, we haven't had any kind of split season before, like we haven't split the season up. But as far as going back to the original boundary, I don't know how many of you are familiar with public shooting grounds and the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge, but really those properties are contiguous. Like Unit 1A of the refuge where the swans hang out is 3 miles as the crow flies from all the ponds over at public shooting grounds. And prior to 2019, about 34% of all the harvest of swans took place at the refuge. And then after we opened up public, around 32% of swan harvest switched over to public shooting grounds. And in my mind, if there's more trumpeter swans around and those properties are contiguous, I mean, they border each other. I just feel like, and I don't know, we have to take guesses, but I feel like we might just be in the exact same boat if we just go back to the boundaries we had a few years ago. If there's more trumpeter swans like we're seeing and the properties are contiguous like they are, I'm just not sure it would solve the problem.
So do you have the table that the division has presented us before that shows how many trumpeters were harvested on public shooting grounds? And then there was the Corinne area, I believe.
Yeah, it's in the.
It was like
it's in the
over
presentation.
50%, wasn't it, between the two of them?
I'm not sure which table you're looking at. I have all the tables right here, but
it was
prior to 2019, 34% of all swans were harvested at.
Yeah, not talking about all
refuge.
swans. It's just about the trumpeters. There's a table that the division sent out or gave us. Maybe it was last time.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen
This
it.
is probably the table you're with all the writing on it.
Yeah,
You're talking
yeah.
about right here. Yeah, we were doing all kinds of funny math on it later or earlier today. I mean, really, like in 2022.
So yeah, last year, how many were harvested of the quota were harvested on PSG?
10 were harvested.
So half
10 out of 380, which was
No,
yeah.
not 10 out of 380. That's 10 out of the 20
I mean,
quota.
yeah, 10 trumpeters out of like
Out of
out of 380 total
No,
swans.
no.
were
We don't
harvested.
care about the total swans. What we care about is how many of the
10 out
quota
of
are-
20.
What's that? Yeah, 10
Yeah,
out of
10
20. So
10
half
out
of the
of 20.
swan, half of the trumpeter swan quota is being harvested on PSG. So if you close that down, I mean, would it push it around? Would it go up and down? We don't know, but we do know that 50% of that quota is being harvested there. And then how many off of Corinne?
The Corinne area is 4.
It's 4. So 25% or 20% of the 20 bird quota is being harvested there. So that's what is that, 14 of 20? You know, I mean, so that's 70% of the trumpeter quota is being harvested off of those 2 areas. That's the point of closing down those areas or not allowing those areas to be hunted as long or however that works. If that does that make sense to
Yeah, it does. I would follow that up with a question like as concerning a split season. Would it make sense to not completely close those areas, but rather I am not a swan hunter. I've never hunted them before, so I'm learning as we go. But from what comments were made earlier, the tundras don't show up until mid-November. Like, what if we just don't open Corinne and public shooting grounds till November 15th? Like, would that have an impact?
Well, yeah, I mean, the swans all come in from the north. So if you didn't open it till November 15th, I think a lot of people would miss out on opportunities to hunt swans up on the north area. So. Do you have any comment on that, Blair?
Yeah. So I guess expand a little bit on Jason's point. So you guys are correct. I mean, half of the swans the last 2 years have come from post shooting grounds as far as trumpeter harvest. We went through and did a little bit of analysis just to look at the percentage of total swans taken on each area and looking at the percentage of those that were trumpeters. And so on public, the last 2 years, so last year we harvested, I can give you the exact number, would have been 380 swans. And so roughly about 2.6% of swans that were shot there were trumpeters. The year prior to that, we harvested about 470 swans on public shooting grounds, and 9 of those were trumpeters, so it was roughly about 2% of those were trumpeters. We then looked at Bear River Bird Refuge, and so we're harvesting a lot fewer swans in Bear River Refuge, but in 2022, we harvested 2 trumpeters there and 71 total swans, which was about 2.8% of those were trumpeters. The year prior to that, Bear River had about 5 trumpeters, and if you look at the total number of swans there, we took 62 at Bear River Refuge, which was about 8% of the swans taken on Bear River Refuge were trumpeters. And so I guess to expand on his point, our concern would be that if you close public shooting grounds, you're simply going to take that 10% of people that moved, or essentially 34% of harvest that moved to public shooting grounds will just shift back to Bear River Refuge. And essentially you'll have the same problem again where people just go to Bear River Refuge to target trumpeters. They just won't go to public. And so I guess in our thought, I mean, really the way to solve the problem of not getting people to shoot trumpeters was to make it illegal. It provides opportunity to extend the hunt as well as allows public shooting grounds where, I mean, roughly about over half of our swans were shot there last year. So it is a fantastic place to be able to hunt swans. It's simply the trumpeter component that is messing all it up for everybody.
So to summarize, what I'm hearing you saying is by closing those areas, we would just move the problem around to other areas. Also, it would have a pretty significant impact on swan hunting opportunities based on the number of swans being taken there.
Yep.
All right. Braden, go ahead.
Blair, question for you. I'm here reading the Federal Register notice where it sets the numbers for each state. And I do wonder, why is it that Idaho, I know they're further north, so maybe they have more birds during the winter, but Idaho and Montana have no quotas, no limitations on trumpeter versus tundra. And then yet we go down in Utah with the Great Salt Lake and a pretty big wetland presence that we only get, that we have this 20 bird limitation. I kind of feel like it's somewhat arbitrary, honestly, that, a state just to the north of us can shoot unlimited number of birds. And here in Utah, we have this problem that's created arbitrarily by the federal government. Can you answer that?
For sure. Yeah, so it probably makes more sense now than it did about 20 years ago when we put these restrictions in place. The hope was that as we expand or increased trumpeter swan populations in that Yellowstone area, that they would begin migrating with other swans and start moving through Utah, Nevada, and eventually end up in California. What we've seen 20 years later is most of those trumpeter swans aren't migrating. They're going to maybe the Utah border. We see them in Preston quite a bit. Most of them tend to hang out in American Falls, but they're not making that migration through Utah and Nevada. And so it's one of the good arguments we would have if we tried to eliminate some of the restrictions we have, is that quota really isn't benefiting that specific part of trumpeter swans because they're just not coming through Utah. But that's the history of it. So.
All right, thanks. I think we've about beat this dead horse enough. I'd entertain a motion if somebody's got one. Personally, I won't make a motion tonight since I'm chairing the meeting, but if I were to make a motion, it would probably look something like specific to the swans to remove the citation penalty or the potential misdemeanor, but still take the swan from the hunter to not allow them to keep it.
Ben, since I threw that idea out there, I guess I could be the guy that, I really like the other recommendations. So I support most recommendations. I don't support the criminalization of the swan harvest. So I think the motion would be we direct Division of Wildlife to revise the recommendation and to come back with an administrative penalty, which would include seizing the permit and the harvested animal.
I'd second that.
All right, so we have a motion by Braden and a second by Mike to recommend no criminal penalty, but to seize a trumpeter swan that has been harvested and the tag. To clarify, is this motion specific to just the swan rule, or is this encompassing any of the remainder part of the agenda item?
Just the Swan rule.
Okay, thank you. All right, any discussion? It's already been seconded. All right, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Unanimous in the room. Let's go online. Josh?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes, in favor.
Scott?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, fantastic. All right, Danny?
Yes.
Braden?
Yes.
Brock?
Yes.
All right, passes unanimously. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion on the ballots.
So moved that we accept the remainder as presented.
Thank you, Brock. Motion by Brock,
Second.
I'll second it.
second by Mike. Any discussion?
Hey, we should give that second to Scott since we can hear him, Ben. I'm just saying.
All right, Mike agrees. Well, second by Scott. All right, let's call for a vote. All in favor? Unanimous in the room. Online, let's go to Josh.
Yes.
Jim?
Yes, in favor.
Scott?
Yes.
Danny?
Yes.
Braden?
Yes.
Brock?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. All right, we've got still 1, 2, 3, 4 action items left. I think we were moving through the last meeting faster. All right, let's take like a 7-minute break and then come back and tackle the rest. You guys cool with that? Okay, so let's, so that puts us back here at 8:55. We'll be. All right, welcome back. We're going to get going again. Next agenda item, live game birds rule amendments, presented by Avery Cook.
Thanks for the opportunity. So from the original presentation online, we've had a couple of suggestions for some changes. The first is just expanding our definition of a Penrod pheasant to include a couple more genuses, Cirromedicus, which is the Reeves and the copper pheasant, and then Chrysolophus to include golden pheasants. Basically, a couple other groups of pheasants that people have in captivity regularly that we wanted to include in the rule. Also, one other, just basically a typo that was noticed where we intended to have field trials on the DWR dog training areas without needing an additional permit, and the rule reference got a little screwed up in there, so we just had to fix that to make it match the original intent of the proposal.
All right, thank you. All right, questions from the RAC? Go ahead, Ken.
This is a dumb question, but I have an Edwards pheasant showed up in my backyard and I put it in with my birds. Is that illegal?
I'm not sure what an Edwards pheasant is. I'd have to get back.
Comes
to you on
from
that.
South Vietnam.
Oh, Lady Amherst would be legal.
Would be legal?
Would be legal, yeah.
All right, other questions from the RAC? Seeing none, questions from the audience. Our audience has dwindled. All right, seeing none there. Jason, do you want to give us a summary of the online comments?
For this topic, which best describes your position regarding the proposed revision to the pen-reared game bird rules? We had 3 comments online, 1 strongly agreed, and 1 was neutral, and neither agreed or disagreed, and nobody left any comments for me to share with you.
All right, thank you. Do we have any public comment cards? Negative on that. All right. Discussion from the RAC.
And you guys are really hammering on me.
Gonna make him feel bad. We had lots of discussion and question on the other ones. All right, if there's no discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept it as presented by the DWR.
Motion by Eric,
I'll second it.
second by AJ. Any discussion? Assuming not, because there was none prior. Call for a vote. All in favor? All right, within the room, we are unanimous. Online, Josh,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes, in favor.
Scott,
Yes.
Danny,
Yeah.
Braden.
Yes, but next time we need to be harder on Avery, just saying.
All right, thanks for that. And I got a message from Brock during the break that says that he has to drop, so we'll excuse him for the remainder of the meeting. So that passes unanimous. All right, next agenda item, collections, importation, and possession rule amendments, R657-3, presented by Charles Lyons.
Hi, everybody, Charles Lyons with the Attorney General's Office, representing the Division of Wildlife Resources. This is the first time, y'all didn't recognize me earlier, so I just kind of wanted to introduce myself. This is the first time I've had an opportunity to come out here in person and do any of this. I've been representing the division for almost a year now, and listening in and helping out on all these wildlife board meetings, and I just appreciate all the work you guys do, and it's a lot of hard decisions and good discussion that comes in. I think everybody appreciates that. So we're here under the presumption that everybody's seen the video and the recorded that we made, and has read through the rule. So essentially just an update. we did have somebody reach out to us. If you remember, we talk about grandfathering in certificates of registration. Somebody reached out to us saying they would like that to be in the rule, that is automatically going to be honored by the division. And so we added some language that would make that effective in the rule, not just a policy of the division. So that's one change. Other changes are specific to the aquatic section. They made some tweaks to the ornamental aquatic animal species definition. I can't read my handwriting. I was making notes while I was back here trying to do that, so it'd be easier if I pull up my computer, I guess. But I think the only other change was that there is a Fish and Wildlife Service form for ornamentals that be imported internationally into the United States, that anybody in possession of an ornamental aquatic animal species would have to be able to provide that form and the identification number of the distributor that they may have gotten that from. So not huge changes, more technical switches that I think will just make it clearer and easier for the division to enforce if need be in the future. So if you guys have any questions or any comments or anything, I'm here to help you out.
All right, thank you. Questions from the RAC?
So to be clear, Charles, I can't own a bear, right? Under this rule, I just want to be clear here.
Correct. Prohibited.
All right, any other questions from the RAC? Seeing none, questions from the audience? All right, Jason, you want to give us a summary of our online comment?
Thanks, Brock. For the question, Ben, which best describes your position regarding the proposed changes to the animal collection, importation, possession rules? We had 2 comments online, one strongly agreed and one was neutral, or neither agreed nor disagreed, and there were no comments left by any of those people that voted online.
Thanks, Jason. No public, no comment cards? All right, we'll move to discussion of, by the RAC. Any discussion? Scott, go ahead.
Hey, I just want to say kudos to the division for trying to clarify the rule. These rules sometimes are really challenging to read and write in such a manner that they're coherent and tight and you can get good meaning out of them. So thanks for making the effort to do that. Appreciate it.
Appreciate the comment.
If there's no other discussion, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move that we accept as presented.
Motion by Scott. Second by Eric. All right, I'll call the vote. All in favor? All right, unanimous in the room. Going online, Josh.
Yes.
Jim.
Yes.
Scott.
Yes.
Danny.
Yes.
Braden.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. All right, we're moving along fairly quickly now. I assume this next one's going to go just as fast. All right, great. So he's on the agenda, Chad.
He is. He's online. He's online there, Ben.
He's on every agenda.
All right. CWMU variance requests presented by Chad Wilson. Chad, do you have any clarifications or additional input for us?
You know, I'm in Arizona. I wasn't planning on being here, but I just couldn't resist. I knew you guys would miss me if I didn't show up. So, no, I guess just to clarify on this obviously came through your RAC last time. And there's some confusion that was brought up. So maybe just to clarify that a little bit, the variances on North Peak that are in question there, those were in a CWMU, in Meadow Creek CWMU, up until 2019. So they weren't trade lands at that time. In 2019, I have a copy of an email sent to me by the operator, and it was addressing trade lands and what they wanted to do with that. And that email clearly states that they wanted to trade 2,040 acres. They sent a map. That map is, all that land is by Grouse Creek or south of Grouse Creek. It's not out by the Nevada border. So it's pretty clear that land, the intent of that CWMU was to never have that be trade lands. Yeah, and with that being said, so with that, whether or not the variance is granted, it won't be trade lands come this fall. And they posted it very clearly, at least last fall, and it would be, I assume, would be posted very clear to no hunting for this fall as well. And then maybe to just touch on the Avinaquin too, is that one, it has a variance for elk. It would still be an elk CWMU, whether the non-contiguous variance went through. And I guess if you want further, I guess go ahead and ask the questions. I expect more than Avery got.
I would imagine so. All right, thanks for that, Chad. I'll start the questions. We got an email from somebody stating that on the Indian Peaks, and this probably isn't within question of what's being presented here tonight, but that CWMU has 2,000 acres of public land, of BLM land within the boundaries of that CWMU. Is that accurate?
So you're meaning North Peaks, not Indian Peaks, right?
I think you're correct. Yeah, my bad.
Yeah, it does have public land in it on the border. It has for quite some time. And that does get heard. That will be heard in November. So they're renewing this summer. When they renew in the summertime, if they have public land in them, it goes through the CWMU Advisory Committee, and it goes through the RAC and the board in November and December. And I think that'd be a more appropriate time to address public land or even trade lands would be at that point in time.
Okay. All right, thank you. Questions from the RAC? Eric.
Yeah, Chad, did you say that the proposed variance lands were part of a different CWMU?
So there used to be a Meadow Creek CWMU out there. It had like 10,000 acres of public land in it. And it also included these two chunks of CWMU land. The CWMU decided to change that, I guess. And so they dropped all that public land out of there. And then they dropped any non-contiguous lands out at that time. And what was contiguous to North Peaks, they added into North Peaks. So North Peaks was a little bit smaller. So it grew a little bit when they dissolved Meadow Creek. And so at that time, it wasn't in an elk CWMU anymore, starting in 2019, but up till 2019, it was. If that makes sense.
Did you have another follow-up?
Yeah, just so to clarify for North Peaks, or I guess it was Twin Peaks at one point, did they have enough private land to be the size of CWMU they were before the Meadow Creek one dissolved?
I guess, well, I think they split it, and I think the operator's here too, so he might be able to help clarify. But I think they split that. So the landowner had land in both of them, and they I guess potentially could have had that in the North Peaks one, but probably to make the other one work is probably why it was split to begin with. So, I mean, the other one had a lot of public land in it, probably to get the acreage necessary is what I assume is why they had land in two different CWMUs.
All right, we've got two hands up online. Let's go to Braden first and then Scott.
Let me take mine down. That was an accident. I went to my phone, so I apologize.
All right, we're going to skip over Braden. Scott, go ahead.
Chad, can you speak to how common non-contiguous parcels are throughout the CWMU program? My concern is this feels like it's relatively new and precedent setting, and I'm a little concerned about that.
Yeah, so I believe it's 12. I haven't looked to specifically. It's between 8 and 12 that have non-contiguous lands in them. The latest one that we did was when I was coordinator, so within the last 4 years. It was a little bit different of a situation because it was the Skull Valley South. They had 3 different non-contiguous parcels that were granted to be one CWMU. All of those non-contiguous parcels on their own were 5,000 acres. So it could have been 3 separate CWMUs. So it was a little bit different, but yeah, we haven't done a lot of those recently, but I would say in rural, it doesn't prohibit it by any means. We talked about that one last time, Scott, with our different interpretations of that rule. So yeah.
Is it safe to say that the vast majority of those with non-contiguous were grandfathered in and didn't come in under this rule?
Yeah, I think, well, and we always use that grandfathered word, but yeah, I don't know that we've had a lot besides that one I just said. I think most of them happened pretty early on.
Because there is, if you read the rule, there is under little I number 1, the general grandfathering clause. If you had a COR in a previous year that permitted this, we're going to let you have it again. So that I understand, but I'm really concerned about this setting precedents going forward that every piece of public land now that's adjacent to a CWU by any given distance could be incorporated into it. And
you mean
being a public land, any private land, yeah, any private parcel. To me, this says any private parcel is subject to be incorporated into a CWMU. And there's nothing in rule that specifies whether it can or can't happen. It's just not there, right? It's just totally void and blank of that discussion. So you guys are going ahead and saying, well, because it's not written in, we can do it. And being the public person representative, I've got to say, no way. That is not going to benefit the public in any fashion. The more land that gets tied up in that and the more permits that are taken that way, eventually all the permits that are available in the state are going to be distributed to CWMUs. I mean, that's way out in their future, but man, if that's what happens, there goes public hunting in the state of Utah. So that's my concern with this.
Yeah, and I guess what I'd say to that, Scott, is that it did go through a process. This isn't something where on every one, if somebody came to us with 10 acres that was 10 miles away, that one we'd obviously say no.
But you wouldn't, because it's not written in code. There's no guidance on that. You might say no, but somebody else in your position might say yes, or a different director's office might say yes. My point is simply that there's nothing written in code to give any guidance on this whatsoever. And because of that, I just can't get behind it.
All right.
All right, other questions from the RAC? Eric.
Yeah, Chad, you probably don't have the ability to pull up a map and show us of that North Peaks, but that just the boundary itself on that northwest corner that kind of sweeps up around is all BLM. And I cannot on any aerial photo or anything that I can see where that would be considered a defensible boundary to have included that BLM parcel, those acres into that. And do you by any chance know how that is?
I believe it is ridge lines and fence lines between those two things. And I will just remind you that one will come back through in November. So it's separate than what this variance is asking for. The public lands and any trade lands, that we'll dive into those hard in November.
Yeah, I understand that, but I just was kind of curious as to that because I don't think I have a problem on the private. It's private land, but it's the one comment was made, and so I will ask you about the rule because there was a comment made about giving back the public lands, and since it's not defined in rule, is there a way for public land to be removed from a CWMU?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be in November. So this one will be heard in November. And if the RACs, well, I guess really the board makes the final decision. If the board says we don't feel comfortable with that public land being in that CWMU, we'd grant this be a CWMU without public land or without accessible public land, then we would move forward with that at that point in time. So every CWMU that has public land in it will get reviewed with every renewal. Law requires that it gets reviewed every 5 years, but where we're on a 3-year cycle, we just committed that we're just going to do it every 3 years. So even if it passed through this year with the public land in it, in 3 years, it's going to get scrutinized again with a chance for that to not be in it again. So it'll be looked at and can be looked at and can be taken out.
All right, so to just quickly summarize, some great questions have been asked regarding the amount of public land in the CWMU, but that is not on the table for this agenda item and could be addressed in November. Currently, we're talking about a variance request to add some non-contiguous parcels into the existing CWMU. Scott, go ahead.
So I agree with you entirely, and that's entirely correct. But I think it does show that historically the state has been very much in favor of landowners' requests. I think that says in the rule that those need to be assessed. Those public lands need to be assessed. But I think it's more that they are accepted. So the point I'm trying to make is simply this. It shows
hold on just a second. Scott, we're still in question period, so please refrain from making your comment, your points until we get to the RAC discussion.
All right.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I've got just a clarifying question. You read the board's mandate to the DWR about CWMUs. Can you reread that one more time?
Okay, yeah, I think that's probably relevant to this. So thanks for bringing that up, Mike. So a motion that was passed by the Wildlife Board at the last board meeting was to ask the division to form a CWMU advisory committee to review the rule and bring recommendations back to the board in June of '24. The committee should consider if the rule is equitable for both the public and private parties. It needs an incentive-based program to encourage CWMUs to fulfill antlerless harvest. So let me clarify that this motion was made during the CWMU antlerless permit recommendations agenda item. Tools need to be in place to encourage CWMU operators and the division to obtain necessary harvest for unit objectives. The rule needs to address non-contiguous lands and set requirements for trade lands. Land traded needs to be comparable to be fair to both the public and the operator. Trade lands need to be posted with a common sign such that the public can easily recognize it as such. If public tags increase or decrease, then CWMU tags should do the same. I think that was a good reminder for this discussion. Thanks, Mike. Okay, I don't see any other questions from the RAC. Do we have any questions from the public? All right, seeing none. Jason, you want to give us a summary of our online comments?
Sure. For the question, which best describes your position regarding the CWMU variance requests? We had 3 comments submitted online, and all 3 strongly disagreed with the variance requests. 2 of those folks left comments for me to read. The first one, and I've just kind of summarized these. I hope you've taken a second to read through them. The first one was to remove all public land from the North Peaks before letting them add non-contiguous. And they also disagreed with this request because it allocates more tags to CWMUs rather than general season, rather than adding those tags to a general season hunt. And the other comment was this, meaning the non-contiguous additions, opens up a can of worms, and all of Box Elder County will be CWMU.
All right, thanks, Jason. We've got one comment card. Gary Webb.
Hi, Gary Webb. I'm the operator of the North Peak Cooperative Unit. And if Chairman, you're okay with it, I'm happy to answer questions if there are some questions. A couple of clarifications from our end. So first of all, in this request, we're not asking for additional permits. It's not taking more permits off the landscape, which I think Scott questioned, and then I think it came up in this comment. As far as to Scott's question broadly about the process, this request was made, it started really last summer. It wasn't a process that was a phone call made and a quick, yes, let's go run it through the RAC committees. We started last summer. This is property that is owned by the landowner that owns the entirety of the private ground in the North Peak Cooperative Unit. They own about 26,000 plus acres across the street. They own this ground as well. It's their private deeded ground. We're not looking to add additional public land. So we went through the process of deciding whether it would be beneficial to the owner group that owns the ground, and also to the resource, which is the wildlife, also to the public hunter that draws a tag on our cooperative unit, and made the decision that we would want to include the landowner's private deeded ground into the landowner's private deeded CWMU. So we got the biologist out there. She came out, gave us a full support that then went through the big game management, Jim Christensen, who gave it his support. It was then presented to Chad, who gave it his support, and we really have had the blessing of everybody. When we went, and to Scott's point about assessing this request, this request had to go through the CWMU Advisory Committee, and that's not a yes or no, come in, make a phone call, say hi, shake someone's hand. It was vetted in the CWMU panel, and I would urge Scott to put a little more credence into the time that the CWMU Advisory Board puts into requests. So it came out of there with a unanimous approval to let this landowner add their private ground into their CWMU. Came all the way through the beginning of the RAC process, and because it didn't show up on the RAC agenda as an individual agenda item, it got tabled halfway through the RAC process. In the Northern RAC last time, 4 weeks ago, it was, I think it was a unanimous vote. There may have been one dissent. Here it was 6-3, and the Southern region, it was a unanimous vote. This is a landowner that has been in the PHU program in the 90s that turned into the CWMU program. A history since day one of never having a single issue that made it into the Wildlife Advisory, the Association Advisory Committee with a complaint. They're a great landowner. This is their land. It's 1.5 miles away from their existing CWMU boundary line. And so that's where we stand. Happy to answer a few questions if anybody has questions for us.
Thank you.
Can I make one last comment, Chairman?
Yeah, I think it said you had a minute left, so.
Okay,
Yep.
one last comment. In the Central RAC last time, this is 3-4 weeks ago, Scott had mentioned the rule and how this does not play into the rule. He talked just a few minutes ago about setting a precedence. I know that there's between 8 and 12 CWMUs that have non-contiguous land. I don't know the history of those CWMUs. We don't know what the circumstances were surrounding them, but I do know that every 3 years, when their COR gets approved, it goes through a process to be approved. So having said that, some people may think it sets a bit of a precedence, but there are units that have non-contiguous land, and this landowner owns this land. It's their deeded land. So I think that's it. I can answer some additional questions if needed.
All right, thank you. Okay, that's the only public comment card that I had, so we will move to RAC discussion now. Yep, saw that, thank you. Just as a reminder, this agenda item is concerning the variance request, not the current status of the CWMU or the public land that is in its boundaries currently. Personally, I do see that public land as a concern, and I think that should be addressed. It sounds like that will be reviewed this fall. So we'll push those discussions to a later time. Josh has his hand up. Go ahead, Josh.
Thanks, Ben. Just out of curiosity, Chad, how many antlerless permits does this CWMU hold or allow?
I think currently they don't have any. Let me look it up real quick. I think it's when we're right at objective on this unit or near it.
It's a migratory herd of elk. We don't have ones.
All right, Chad, we're getting from the operator confirmation that there is 0 antlerless permits, that it's a migratory herd that they're hunting there.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Further discussion. Eric.
Yeah, I have a hard time getting behind this at the moment, and I think we need to, when the rule, I would like to see variance be defined a little better as to what can be a variance. And then also, just because it's not in the rule doesn't necessarily make it right to be able to do it. I mean, we use kind of a little formula on my end with my decision making. Is it right? Is it reasonable? And is it regulation? And it might be reasonable to say, yes, the variance, for these 2 pieces to come in would be reasonable. But since there isn't a rule or regulation, then I don't think that makes it right, which is where I would have a hard time supporting this. I think if the rule can be done as was mentioned by through the board to say, hey, we're going to revisit this, and it was actually to look at that, and they were to define that a little better, then that's, I think, the time to, let them wait that out and not have it go through this time. So I would be opposed to this.
Thanks, Eric. Scott, go ahead.
So I missed the operator's name, but thank you so much for coming and representing your industry and your CWMU. I really appreciate that. I understand these go through the CWMU board. I do not feel that they represent public interest very well. I'll just leave it at that. I think the board is on track with the motion that's already been made. My feeling is simply the same, that I really don't have that much issue with adding a non-contiguous parcel if we have some regulation built into code that prevents every private parcel in the state from getting wrapped into a CWMU. Should that happen, we are going to be kicking ourselves forever. So I can't get behind this until we have some code that defines what is going to be permissible and what's not. At this point, I'm thinking we're gonna add that discontinuous parcel. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say, well, now we have a non-definable boundary, so we got to pull that public land in to create a non-definable boundary, right? And because it's not written in code that we can't do that, it kind of is, but that's not the way we interpret it. That could happen. I don't think it would, but that could happen because it's not written in code. So that's my biggest gripe behind this whole suggestion here, is that we need some better definition in code to preclude the things we don't want to happen so that we can allow the things that we do want to happen.
Thanks, Scott. Further discussion?
Well, I better step up to the plate because this is a hard one.
Go ahead, Mike.
I serve on the CWMU Advisory Committee. And I seconded the motion to allow this lands into this CWMU. I think if there was ever a reason to include non-contiguous parcels, this would be a great case for it.
Mike, can you give us some insight into why?
Yeah, so because on the advisory, I actually went back and watched it this afternoon, and it's online for everybody to see. It's some parcels that are owned by the same entity, and they're within essentially the same herd unit, the same, they're within a mile and a half. A deer on the run could be on one to go to the other one. What struck me when I went back and watched it is the division actually used words like, this could be problematic. This could, what can go, like, what happens if we approve this and then, somebody, wants to jump their neighbor and take them out of a CWMU and put their parcel in, and then we start to get this conglomerate that kind of comes together. That was that was said by, by the division there, and, worrying about, like, does it have to be in the same herd unit and all these things, which are great discussion points. What might cause me to change the way I felt from February to today is when the board directs the division to create the CWMU rule committee, and they use that specific terminology of dealing with non-contiguous parcels. It gives me pause that maybe there's more to be looked at in this. And it's not just this CWMU. I think, like I told Gary, and like I said, it's probably the perfect example of why we could include it. But then the other one that's on the table is the Avinaquin one, and I believe that's a different landowner that has that non-contiguous parcel. And when we start to think of, well, what non-contiguous parcel of a different landowner, and Eric made a great point that just because it doesn't say we can or can't, maybe we need to define that. And the board's given us that, or has given the division that mandate. And there's actually a deadline with it. I mean, if there was a way to approve the North Peaks one as like in verbiage, it would have to be, this is only good for this COR and it only goes, and then it becomes under the guise of the written rule after it's passed, But yeah, it's a tough one. It is. It's a really tough one because there's some ambiguity to it. It's not cut and dried. And so I can answer any other questions you guys have too. So.
Thanks for that insight, Mike. Appreciate it. Any other discussion from the RAC? Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, Mr. Webb, I'm not, directing, I think as a whole of this whole CWMU, non-contiguous, how it's all in there, that's where my comments are coming from. It's not directed, just, just want to make sure that's clarified, that it's not to that setting a precedence. I think that's maybe that I kind of see that coming out. And I think if we could just wait till that rule is redefined or better defined, I guess, on how that all goes together, then, my support back on some of these would be a whole lot easier to deal with. And I think I kind of sit there with Scott on that same thing, that it's in now. Where does it go from here? Where do we go to the next one, to the next one, the next one? So.
Thanks, Eric. All right. Chad, go ahead.
Yeah, do you mind if I just clarify, I guess, a little bit?
Go ahead.
And I guess, we've talked a little bit about process, and we have we have a current rule in place. We have a process that it did go through. So I realize, I understand the concern about precedent setting and boundaries and stuff. What I would say on this one is that it didn't just get rubber stamped and put in. It was heard by an advisory committee. So any future ones with the concern of like everything in Box Elder being added in, they would all have to go through the advisory committee. They'd all have to go through the RAC. They'd all have to get passed by the board. And so we don't currently have sideboards in the current rule, but we do have a process, and we are going through that process at this time. And I totally understand the concern, and I think everybody going forward with the new rule would want some sideboards on this. But at the same time, I think it's been looked at by the division, by the advisory committee, and these two pieces were deemed reasonable to be added in as non-contiguous. The way going forward, they won't have public opportunity on them. If they're in a CWMU, they do have public opportunity. Those that draw the CWMU tag would be able to hunt them. So I just felt like I probably should just clarify that it is getting looked at. Other ones would get looked at. There's not strong sideboards on it, but it would go through, does this make sense test through all of the RACs and the CWMU advisory committee and the division. Like, there's a lot of people that have to be on board to make this happen.
Thanks, Chad. All right, I think we might be ready for a motion.
I would move that we don't accept either of these.
All right, I got two motions coming simultaneously. Scott's motion was to deny approval of both. And I didn't hear if you, I heard his motion. I didn't hear if you got one. I don't know who was first.
I was gonna say, just accept them. I think it's a good process it's been through, and
All right.
it's good points. both sides.
I heard Scott's entire motion first. We're gonna go with that one on the table. So we have a motion by Scott to deny both variance requests. We have a second by Ken. Discussion.
I appreciate Chad's perspective there, that there's some discussion that has to happen, or that happens to make this process happen. But I would also say that same discussion leaves 2,000 acres of public land in this CWMU. And that same discussion on the one for the Avanic one allows a parcel of 640 acres of state trust lands accessible by a county road that the sportsmen pay lease on to hunt within a CWMU that we don't have access to. So my point is simply that the decisions that the advisory groups are making don't represent what John Q. Public wants.
Let me clarify on that one. The Avaniquin doesn't have any, it wouldn't have any public land in it. It'd be between the non-contiguous and the contiguous, but the Avaniquin doesn't have any public land in it.
I was quite sure it was showing a section of state trust lands.
No, there's division land between it, but yeah, I don't know, maybe that map's off. Avaniquin doesn't have any public land in it. I'll double check that right now, but I'm 99.9% sure.
Thanks, Chad. Eric, you had a comment?
Yeah, it was similar to Scott's. Just appreciated Chad's comments there on the process and understand the process. And I think that's why we're still going through this, and I'm still going to vote the way I'm going to vote there, but appreciate his clarifications and comments.
All right, I'm about ready to call for a vote unless somebody has additional input. Okay, we're going to call this for a vote. So as a reminder, the motion is to deny both variance requests. Call for a vote. All in favor within the room? 1, 2, 3, 4. I got 4 in favor, in the room. All opposed? One opposed. Let's go online. Josh?
Yes, in favor of denial.
Thank you. Jim?
I'm opposed.
Thank you. Scott?
Yes.
Thank you. Danny?
Yeah, I'm opposed.
Opposed? Thank you. I got a message from Braden that he got called to visit somebody in the emergency room, so we're going to excuse him at this point and wish him well. So with that, I've got the motion carries 6 in favor and 3 opposed. So our 3 of opposition were AJ, Danny, and I don't remember the other one.
Me, Jim.
Yeah. All right. AJ, do you want an opportunity to provide input as to your opposition?
Oh, I agree with Chad. I think the RAC or the committees and things have gone through a little bit of inlight from Mike over here. Tough one. I'll be honest, it's a tough one, but I just feel they've gone through the process and we put them through the ringer. It's not their fault. We don't have the information, like you guys have mentioned about the precedents and that. So I just thought they'd done their deal. It was, I guess, somebody dropped the ball and it's not. Anyways.
Thanks, AJ. Jim, do you want to speak to your opposition?
Yeah, well, I agree with what AJ said, but primarily, I don't think it's fair for someone who owns land to not be able to put it with another entity that he owns land, and the only people that and the public would benefit. So the public will not benefit now that we're voting no. The public would have benefited had we agreed with the division. So that's it. I'm all for the public.
Okay, thank you. Danny?
Yeah, I just thought that I look at it like they squeezed under the door, you know what I mean? We've got to move parallel with these other, these other criteria and things that we want to. I think it's not good old boy so much as this was really a tough decision for me to make too.
All right, thanks, Danny. Okay, we have one last agenda item, and that is election of RAC Chair and Vice Chair. So this one, I'm assuming we don't go to the public, or this is all in.
Nope,
internal, right?
if it's all right with you, Ben, I'll just go ahead and kind of work through what's happened over the last week and get nominations and votes. So a week ago today, I sent an email out to the RAC members soliciting nominations for a chair and a vice chair. And we elect a chair and a vice chair every 2 years as we have people coming on and coming off of the RAC. So I did get some nominations for a chair and a vice chair, and I've spoken to each of the individuals that I have a nomination for. For a chair, I have nominations for Brock to remain the chair, and I spoke with Brock, and he's willing to do that. And I also have a nomination for Mike to be the chair. And if it's all right if I speak for you, I spoke with Mike yesterday, I believe, and he's willing to accept that as well. Also for maybe we'll just stop right there for a second and do a vote for the chair. Well, no, I'll go ahead and go on. So for vice chair, I had 2 nominations as well. I had a nomination for Mike to be vice chair and also for Scott to be vice chair. And Mike has agreed to serve in whatever capacity that the members of the RAC would have him serve. Or not. Fair enough. And also I spoke with Scott earlier, and Scott, I hope is he still on? Is he gone? Okay, he's still on. Scott, if I misspeak, then maybe I'll just let you give your thoughts on being nominated. Or I'll give your thoughts.
My preference would be that Mike I'd do that or do the other one.
Okay. Danny, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just in my opinion, a point of order. It seems like we just, like you were heading originally, we just got to, because we don't know that, that whoever does not get elected as the chair might not run as the vice chair. So that's just all. That's all I know.
Yeah, and I had the same thought. I went a different way, but
I think it was fine to mention all the nominations. I think we vote individually, vote for chair first and then vice chair after the results of that are
sure, absolutely.
known. That's my opinion.
Before we go into any votes, are there any other nominations that anybody would like to make?
So Jason,
Okay.
I guess our conversation was that my preference would really be to remove myself from a nomination unless there wasn't someone else willing to serve. So I'm seeing that since there likely is, I would prefer to remove myself from consideration.
Okay.
Well, that would depend on the outcome
Of the chair vote at this point. So, okay, so what we'll do is on the table around you or in front of you or near you, there should be some pieces of paper. And if you are online, I think all of you have my cell phone number. And Braden's back on. You missed some great stuff, Braden. We're going to be voting for our chair at this point. And the vote will be either for Brock to remain as chair or for Mike Christensen to be the new chair. If you're online, if you could just send me a text, I'll count that as your vote. And then in the room here, if you'll just write a name on your piece of paper and hand it to me, then I'll tally the votes from there.
Jason, I do not have your cell number, but I do have your email address. Is that sufficient?
That'd be great. Thanks.
And worse yet, this guy doesn't even have a cell phone. I know.
So you don't have a way to contact me privately, Danny? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying I could call you on my landline.
Is it tied to the wall?
No, and I can lift it. Look.
I was worried about you, Danny, when I first learned you like to eat carp and mud hens, but now I know.
Now you understand. Okay, we're good. No, so as a matter of efficacy and as a parting shot, I'm abstaining from this vote.
Do you want to call me, Danny? Like, I don't want to.
I don't want to call you anything, dude. I'm going to just abstain. We're good.
And Jason, I'll just email you as well.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Brandon. Okay, perfect. I've got everybody's votes. So with, so there's 10 people left here with a vote of 7-3. Brock will remain our chair moving forward. So with that now decided and Scott and somebody else available other than Scott to be the vice chair, we have no other nominations for vice chair for Mike. So Mike wins. I don't know either. Like, does everybody feel like writing Mike's name on a piece of paper.
A vote of affirmation could be done.
Yeah. That's fine. Okay. Okay. Let's go ahead, just go ahead and let's vote and let's make it official. So if the folks online do the same thing again. And I saw some of you say that again, sorry.
I think, yeah, as I said, you want to email you, are we good? I'll email you with my vote.
I got yours, Braden. Will be official. It's unanimous, Mike. So, in favor, yeah, in favor.
Just notice
So-
how many times he has to sit there and Rob doesn't show up.
I voted for Rock, just so you guys know. So three of you guys, when I find out who it was.
Well, I think Brock has done an excellent job, so I think he'll continue to do an excellent job. Mike, I think he'll do a great job as his backup, as his second, so.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for voting and going through that with me. And so we'll have Brock serve as the chair for the next 2 years and Mike as the vice chair for the next 2 years as well. So thank you both for being willing to serve, and thanks for everybody else for serving as well.
All right, with that, meeting adjourned. Thank you.